the love that was shared. Love never dies, it merely changes form. If you have lost a loved one, perhaps when you close your eyes, you can still feel their presence, and certainly when you think of your loved one, your heart fills with pain. If you have ever felt this way, this video is for you. Today, I will share the 9 things that people physically see at the moment of death. The information in this video comes directly from the Bible, but also from accounts of people who have had a near-death experience, also known by the acronym NDE. These are people who sometimes reach a state of clinical death, but then come back to life and are able to explain what they saw when they died. First, the person sees their departed loved ones. When they die, they see them clearly, waiting to guide them toward the light, which leads them with peace and joy. Imagine your loved one on their deathbed, their eyes close, but then they open in a new world. There, in the twilight between life and death, familiar faces appear. Those who departed earlier are neither a dream nor a hallucination. They are there, waiting as if they knew it was their time, and the place where they wait is also a place protected by God, because God is not the God of the dead, but of the living, for to him all are alive. According to Ecclesiastes, the spirit returns to its origin, where loved ones are. Then shall the dust return to the earth as it was, and the spirit shall return unto God who gave it. The person at death clearly sees without a doubt that these departed loved ones are there to guide them. There is no fear, no loneliness, just an indescribable peace and a warm light that envelops the scene. Psalm 36 also reinforces this idea. For with you is the fountain of life. In your light we see light. Some report that at the moment the deceased sees the light, those accompanying the dying can feel something, a sweet floral scent that fills the room. It's a sign, a whisper from beyond, a manifestation of those spirits who have come to take their loved one to a place of peace. I want to take a brief moment to encourage you to write in the comments, as it can greatly help others who share your knowledge about their departed loved ones. Explain how much you miss that person. Many people watching this video will be going through difficult times due to the loss of a loved one, and it can comfort them greatly to read about your experience and know they are not alone. By doing so, you can help others who watch this video and want to feel understood and know that there are more people going through the same situation. For example, you can describe the pain you felt or feel in losing someone close, or what you did to overcome the loss, or even explain what advice from others helped you at the time. Your comment could help many of us. Now continuing, we were talking about how sometimes when a loved one passes, those around them can detect a slight smell of flowers. This is a moment full of tension and drama, a clash between the earthly and the divine that forces us to reflect on the fragility of our existence and what really matters at the end of the road. For in these last moments, riches, achievements, and daily concerns fade away. Only love remains, the invisible bond that unites those who departed before us. And so, at the moment of death, a truth we all must face. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me, thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. There is nothing more powerful than the love that transcends death, a love that knows no limits or boundaries, and in the end, we all meet in that light, guided by those who preceded us. Because death is not the end, but the beginning of a new journey. Number 2, a sense of detachment from material possessions. Secondly, another sensation that patients nearing death experience is that all the things they own in life, all material possessions, become unimportant. This is positive because it means they don't cling to anything and can transcend directly without any problem. Imagine the last breath of your loved one, the moment when everything you know dissolves into nothing. At that precise moment when life escapes like sand between the fingers, something incredible happens. In the material world, everything that was once important loses its value. The house you loved so much, the car you cared for diligently, the jewelry, the titles, the achievements, all fade away in a sigh. None of it matters anymore. It's as if at the time of death a truth is revealed, a truth we ignore throughout our lives. When someone is about to die, a brutal honesty takes over their mind. It's at this moment that they realize that the possessions, wealth, and goods they accumulated with so much effort are merely shadows, illusions that hold no weight on the threshold between life and death. Because we brought nothing into this world, and it is certain we can take nothing out of it. This verse resonates strongly at that moment, when the dying person detaches from everything material. It's a release, a final severance with the earthly world that allows them to move forward, unchained to the unknown. It's a moment of pure, raw truth. Everything they fought for, everything that once caused worry, simply vanishes. What matters isn't found in tangible things. It's not the big house, nor the money in the bank, nor the objects that once defined identity. What does it profit a man to gain the whole world, yet forfeit his soul? This question suddenly takes on an overwhelming significance. In the end, all that remains is the bare soul, free from the ties of the world. And this is where the reflection becomes almost universally profound. In the end, all that exists is something beyond the material, something that transcends the physical world. It's a feeling we all share, though sometimes we forget it in the hustle and bustle of everyday life. Death reminds us of this truth in a way we cannot ignore. At that moment we understand that true wealth is not in what we possess, but in what we are, in what we carry in our hearts and souls. This detachment, this abandonment of the material, is a curse, but also a blessing. It allows us to cross to the other side without burdens, without weights that sink us into darkness. It prepares us for a meeting with the eternal, with the divine. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moths and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven. In death, this teaching becomes true. It is then that the light shines brightest. When the soul is free from bondage, it ascends towards the infinite. This is the final act of liberation. At the end of the road, only what truly matters remains. The material dissolves, and the soul prepares for the great journey. It's a reminder to all of us that in life, the essential isn't in what we own, but in what we are, in the love we give, and the peace we carry with us. Because in the end, that is the only wealth we can carry. Let's continue with the third thing that people see when they die. Number 3. They see their own body from above. Thirdly, when they die physically, people often see their body from above, observing all the people present. They see those around them crying, suffering, and witness everything that happens around them. In that moment, they perceive everything, hear everything, and feel everything. They may even say goodbye to their loved ones. Imagine for a moment that life, with all its pain and beauty, comes to an end. Your loved one takes their last breath, and what happens next is something beyond the imaginable. Suddenly, your loved one is no longer in their body, but they haven't completely disappeared either. They find themselves floating, suspended in a space between life and the eternal. From above, they see their motionless body, surrounded by faces full of pain, tears, and despair. But your loved one is somewhere else, a place from where they observe what happens as a spectator of their own death. This moment is one of the most shocking that a person can experience after death, because a body without spirit is dead. Now, without that body which for years was their home, your loved one is pure spirit, and from this privileged vantage point, perceives everything with a clarity they never had before. Your loved one sees those they love, sees their pain, hears their sobs, and feels their suffering as if it were their own. It's a devastating yet profound moment. To weep with those who weep is a testament to the love surrounding them, a love so great that tears fall like rain. You realize how much you meant to them, and how your departure has left a void impossible to fill. But there's more. From this place of observation, your loved one may say goodbye and give a final farewell. There are no words, but the message is conveyed in a language beyond what is human, a language of the soul. The spirit itself bears witness to our spirit. This testimony is deep, filled with love, gratitude, and peace. It's a farewell that, though silent, resonates in the depths of the hearts of those left behind. The spirit of your loved one communicates with the spirit of the living and bears witness to their last goodbye. And this is where reflection arises, a truth that all of us carry within us, though we hide it in the depths of our being. Death is not the end. It's a step, a transition, a transformation. At this moment, as your loved one observes from above, they understand that life is not measured by the years lived, but by the love given, the bonds created, and the impact left on those who mourn for them. And I heard a voice from heaven saying, "Blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. Yes," says the Spirit, "they will rest from their labor, for their deeds follow them." What your loved one sees from above is a reflection of the life they lived. It's a moment of personal judgment, not of condemnation, but of pure truth. At that moment they realize what really matters: love, compassion, memories. And although they are no longer in their body, their presence is still strong. The spirit says goodbye, but does not disappear, leaving an indelible mark on the hearts of those who love them. This is a moment full of tension, overflowing emotions, but also deep peace, because in that silent farewell, your loved one understands that although life on earth has ended, love does not die. Love never ceases to exist. And that is the most powerful truth of all, which finally transcends death. Number 4. They visit the dreams of living people to say goodbye. Sometimes after people die, they remain for a short period in this plane. They do this to visit places they need or wish to see for various reasons. One of these reasons is to say goodbye to other family members who were not present when they departed and want to offer them peace. Thus, there are cases where people see relatives in dreams or feel their presence without knowing that they have already passed away. Just at the moment when they see them, the person who just died travels as an energy that touches the dreams of the people they love. Your loved one felt their last breath escape from their body, and at that moment everything changed. They were no longer a prisoner of pain nor the weight of flesh. Now they were light, pure energy. But they did not leave immediately. Something kept them in this world, a force stronger than death itself, love. From this new perspective, your loved one saw everything with overwhelming clarity. They knew they had left the body behind, but were not ready to depart completely. There were places they needed to visit, farewells they had not yet given. It was as if they had one last task to complete, a sacred mission, before crossing to the other side. First, your loved one went to see their sister. She wasn't in the room when he died, and this tormented her. He found her sleeping, her face tired from so much crying. He approached her, leaned over her, and though there were no words, his presence said everything. For he will command his angels concerning you to guard you in all your ways. He was not an angel, but his mission at that moment was to offer comfort and peace. And his sister, though still sleeping, felt a sudden relief, a calm that flooded her being. In that moment she knew everything would be all right. But it wasn't just for his loved one. He knew there were others who needed to say goodbye, even if they didn't know it themselves. The cousin they hadn't seen in many years, the old friend never forgotten, each received a last trace of his essence. He appeared in dreams or in an unexpected breeze, and while they might not have consciously known, deep in their souls, they understood that this visit was his farewell on his final journey. He understood something he hadn't seen in life, that death was not the end, but a transition. Love never ceases to exist, and like energy, like light, he moved through the places and people he loved, leaving a spark of his love in each one. He knew that, when he finally crossed over to the other side, those sparks would continue to shine in the hearts of those he ultimately left behind. The time had come for your loved one. He said his goodbyes, offered consolation, and closed all chapters. Now he felt the call of the eternal, a profound peace inviting him to rest, and with one last look, he let himself be carried away, knowing he had fulfilled his mission, and that God would wipe every tear from his eyes, and there would be no more death, nor sorrow, nor crying, nor pain, for the former things have passed away. Your loved one vanished into the light, but his presence, his love, and the traces he left continue in this world, in the hearts of those he touched forever. Number 5, viewing their own life as a movie. In 5th place, as they transcend, people begin to see their life as if it were a movie. Both good and bad moments present themselves, and they ponder whether they enjoyed life and were happy. This is shown to them so they can relive these significant moments and truly understand what their life on this plane was like. Your loved one crossed the threshold, that boundary separating life from the eternal, but instead of disappearing into nothingness, now finds themselves in a different space where time does not hold the same form, where past and present intertwine in a single thread of memories. In this state, something profound and revealing happens. The life of your loved one begins to unfold before them like a movie, a sequence of images, sounds, and emotions. Every moment, from childhood days to the last breath, passes before their eyes with moving clarity. There are no lies or illusions here. Everything is seen exactly as it was, for there is nothing hidden that will not be revealed, nor secret that will not come to light. This is the naked truth, the summation of a life revealed in its entirety. Your loved one watches the good times, those days of pure happiness, when laughter filled the rooms and love seemed eternal, but they also see the difficult moments, the mistakes, decisions made in the dark, the words they wished they could take back. For we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, so that each may receive what is due for what he has done in the body, whether good or bad. It is not a judgment in the condemning sense, but rather a review, an opportunity to truly understand the life your loved one lived. They question whether they were happy, whether they savored each day, whether they loved enough, lived with purpose. It is a profound reflection that touches the deepest fibers of their being, because in the end, what matters is not only what was done, but how it was lived. Teach us to number our days, that we may gain a heart of wisdom. Now, in this space between worlds, the wisdom of a well-lived life is what they seek. And amidst all this, your loved one realizes something essential. Life wasn't perfect, but it was filled with moments that defined their essence. The laughter, the tears, the triumphs, and the falls all have a purpose, a meaning that perhaps wasn't understood in life, but now is revealed with astonishing clarity. In this final review, your loved one is not alone. The divine presence accompanies them, guiding them on this journey of self-assessment. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, the first and the last. From beginning to end, God was there at every moment, and now he reveals the whole truth about your loved one's existence. At the end of this process, your loved one understands that happiness was not a destination, but rather the journey taken, that true wealth was not in material things, but in shared moments, in acts of love, and in the pursuit of inner peace. With this understanding, they feel at peace, ready to continue their journey towards the eternal, knowing that their life, with all its imperfections, was fully lived. And so, with this final revelation, your loved one bids farewell to this life with a sense of accomplishment, because, although it wasn't always easy, every moment was worth it. I have fought the good fight, I have finished the race, I have kept the faith. And now, with a light heart and a tranquil spirit, your loved one advances towards the light that awaits them. Number 6. Seeing an intense light. Those who have had near-death experiences often describe seeing a great light, a feeling of profound peace, or a vision of a beautiful place, a paradise they do not wish to leave, but from which they must return because their time has not yet come. However, for those whose time has come, this light is the place they must go, the place they will be guided to, and where they will dwell, in that beautiful place spoken of. Your loved one has reached that moment we all face, the instant when earthly life disappears and eternity opens like a vast horizon. There was no fear, only a deep calm that enveloped their being. Suddenly they felt a light. It was not an ordinary light. It was bright, warm, and filled everything. It was as if every fiber of their soul was drawn to it by a force more powerful than anything they had known in life. Approaching this light revealed a place of indescribable beauty, a paradise, a haven of peace where time does not exist, where pain and suffering are just distant memories. "In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you." This was the place that had been prepared for them, the final destination where they would find eternal rest. Your loved one felt an immense peace, something they had never experienced on earth. There was no urgency, no rush. The past, with all its struggles and anxieties, disappeared, replaced by a serenity that completely enveloped them. It was as if every wound, every pain was dissolved in the light, leaving only the pure essence of their being. For many who have had near-death experiences, this light and this place are just a glimpse, a brief encounter before they are brought back to life. But for your loved one, there was no return. That was the final moment of their earthly journey and the beginning of an eternal existence in that paradise so often spoken of in Christian tradition. The experience of seeing a light at the moment of death is interpreted as an encounter with the divine presence, the glory of God, or the entry into his kingdom. This light is a symbol of God's guidance and love. While the Bible does not explicitly describe the experience of light at death, it offers several verses that help to understand this idea within the Christian faith. In the Bible, God is described as light. This light is a symbol of his holiness, purity, and glory. In John 1, we are told that God is light, and in him there is no darkness. This light represents the truth and eternal life that God offers to all who believe. When someone is on their deathbed and sees a light, Christians interpret this as an approach to the Creator, who is described as a pure and resplendent being. Jesus presents himself as the light of the world in John chapter 8, saying, "I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life." This verse emphasizes that those who followed Christ during life will not walk in darkness when they die, but will be guided by the light to eternal life. The vision of the light at the moment of death can be seen as the fulfillment of the promise of being guided into the kingdom of God. In the book of Revelation, describing the New Jerusalem, it is said to be the city that needs neither the sun nor the moon to shine, for the glory of God illuminates it, and the Lamb is its lamp. This apocalyptic image reinforces the idea that the light seen by the dying is a foretaste of the glory of God, a welcome into the divine presence in heaven. As your loved one moved toward the light, everything became clearer. They understood that life on earth was merely a preparation, a stage before reaching this final destination. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me and for the gospel will save it. Here, in this place of peace, they understood that the true purpose of life was to prepare for this moment, to reach this place where the soul finds its eternal home. And so, with one last look at the world they left behind, your loved one fully surrendered to the light. There was no sadness, no painful farewells, just a profound sense of fulfillment for having achieved their purpose. At that moment, they knew they were exactly where they were supposed to be, in the place where they would live forever in peace and harmony. Number 7, the purpose of life. In 7th place, our loved ones discover significant revelations about their existence and purpose. They learn that everything they experienced was for their benefit and spiritual evolution, that nothing happens by chance, and that everything was a choice. Then, they realize that their path has been fruitful, that their spiritual evolution has been considerable. Your loved one has crossed the threshold of death and now finds themselves in a space where time and space dissolve into pure consciousness. There is no more pain or confusion, only an overwhelming clarity that reveals deep truths about the life they left behind. In this state, they begin to understand something they had never perceived before with such intensity. Absolutely everything had a purpose. As their consciousness floats in this new plane of existence, a powerful revelation unfolds before them. Every moment of their life, from the most insignificant to the most transcendental, was part of an intricate design. Nothing was random. Everything has its time, and everything under heaven has its time. Now they understand that each joy, each sorrow, each decision made was part of a greater plan that they themselves chose before they were born. Your loved one discovers that their existence was not just a passage of days, but a journey toward spiritual evolution. All the challenges they faced, the trials they overcame, were not punishments or mere bad luck, but lessons, opportunities for growth, to polish the soul like a diamond under pressure. He who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion until the day of Christ Jesus. They now know that this work was their own spiritual development, and each step in their life was a step toward perfecting their spirit. The tension of this revelation is intense. It is a moment of pure introspection, where the weight of their decisions and experiences falls upon them. Was their life fruitful? Did they fulfill the purpose for which they came into the world? And then, with overwhelming clarity, they understand that yes, their life was a success, not in terms that the world might consider, but in terms of the soul. Their spirit grew, evolved. They learned the lessons they came to learn. With this understanding comes deep reflection. They realize that in life we often get carried away by the superficial, forgetting that we are here for something greater than just existing. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. At that moment, your loved one realizes that true transformation is not achieved by accumulating wealth or seeking recognition, but by cultivating the spirit, loving, forgiving, and learning to find peace. As each revelation envelops him, there are no doubts or regrets, only a deep understanding that everything he experienced had a purpose. Each tear, each smile, each act of love, and each mistake were essential pieces of a puzzle that he now sees in its entirety. And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him. In death, this truth shines more clearly than ever. Everything that seemed inexplicable was for good, for his spiritual growth. And so, with this new understanding, your loved one feels ready to continue his journey. He has fulfilled his mission on earth, learned what he needed to learn, and now he is prepared for what comes next. He knows his path does not end here, that the evolution of the soul continues in the afterlife, but he does this with the tranquility of knowing he gave his best and lived a full and meaningful life. In this last moment of revelation, he bids farewell with love, leaving a legacy of wisdom and growth. His earthly journey has come to an end, but his spirit continues, filled with peace, wisdom, and the certainty that everything was as it should be. Number 8. Seeing beyond. As you move toward the light, you begin to see other people, those who departed before you, loved ones who wait for you with open arms. Blessed are those who are invited to the wedding supper of the Lamb. Here, in this place beyond what mortal eyes can see, souls gather in a joyous reunion. There is no more pain, no more suffering, only the purity of love that transcends death. But what you see is not just a reunion. The environment around you continues to transform into an indescribably beautiful landscape. It is unlike anything you have seen on earth, yet at the same time, everything seems familiar, as if the paradise you once imagined has become reality before your eyes. He who overcomes will inherit all things, and I will be his God, and he will be my son. This is the promised place, an eternal home where all promises are fulfilled. In this new heaven and new earth, everything is majestic, untainted by the corruption of the old world. The colors are more vivid, the air is purer, and every step you take leads to a place where everything is perfect, immaculate. And I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. As your loved one enters this new realm, they are in the holy city, the New Jerusalem. In the book of Revelation, the streets are paved with pure gold, clear as crystal. There is no night here, for the presence of God illuminates every corner. The walls are adorned with all kinds of precious stones, and gates made of giant pearls are always open, inviting all who have been redeemed. As they walk these glorious streets, your loved one realizes they are not alone. Angels surround them, beings of unparalleled beauty and purity, who accompany them with soft, melodious songs. And I heard the voice of many angels around the throne, and the creatures and the elders, and the number of them was 10,000 times 10,000. These angels guide him toward the throne of God, where everything culminates in a vision of divine majesty and power. Finally, he reaches the throne, where he sees God himself, surrounded by a light so intense that it cannot be looked at directly, but whose presence is felt in every fiber of his being. And I saw him who sat on the throne, whose appearance was like jasper and carnelian, and around the throne was a rainbow that looked like an emerald. Before the throne there is a sea of glass, clear and tranquil, reflecting the purity of the divine. Number 9, meeting with God. In that moment, as the soul becomes aware of its new life and feels full and radiant, your loved one has reached the end of his earthly life. With the last heartbeat, everything that is known fades into a whisper, and he finds himself in a completely different place, a space where time dissolves and peace envelops him. There is no more pain, no more fear, only a deep calm that fills every corner of his being. At that moment he perceives a presence that has always accompanied him, although he may not have realized it so clearly before. It is an overwhelming sensation, an indescribable force that envelops and fills him with a love so pure and perfect that there are no words to describe it. For now we see through a glass, darkly, but then face to face. For the first time, your loved one clearly sees what was before, only felt the presence of God. This encounter transcends any earthly experience. Before his eyes, a bright light appears, brighter than any sun, but this light does not blind, it reveals. Deep down, your loved one does not see God as a distant and inaccessible figure, but as the very source of all that is good, of all that is true. Under this light, he recognizes himself not just as a finite being, but as part of God's eternal plan. It's a moment of pure revelation, where all doubts and fears dissipate in the presence of God. Your loved one feels a peace so profound that no earthly experience could match. In thy presence is fullness of joy. At thy right hand,
Let's dive right in, Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. Two creation stories, right there, side by side, in the Bible. And you've probably read them, but here's what's wild, they don't exactly tell the same story. Now, before you say, wait, isn't this all part of one big seamless narrative? Hold on, let's look closer. In Genesis 1, we have this cosmic, orderly account of creation. It's structured, it's methodical. 6 days, one after the other. First, light is created, light before the sun, by the way, which is weird, right? Then the separation of waters, dry land, plants, animals, and finally, on day 6, humanity. Male and female. Done. It's a God who stands above everything, speaks things into existence, and sees that it's all good. A powerful, transcendent being, creating from a distance. But then Genesis 2 comes along, and it's like you're suddenly in a different movie. It starts with a barren earth, no plants, no rain, and no people. God steps down from the heavens, gets his hands dirty, literally forms Adam from the dust, and breathes life into him. But God in Genesis 2 is more intimate, hands-on. And what happens next? God plants a garden, then creates animals, and later, after realizing Adam's alone, makes Eve from his rib. The whole sequence feels so different. It's personal, almost experimental. And unlike the distant, all-powerful God of Genesis 1, this God is involved, responsive, like he's figuring things out as he goes. So, why the difference? The stories seem to be two different portrayals of God, creation, and humanity. In Genesis 1, man and woman are created together, in God's image. Equal. But in Genesis 2, Adam is made first, and Eve comes later, almost like an afterthought. That's a pretty big shift in tone, right? Scholars have been debating this for centuries. These aren't just two versions of the same story. These are two distinct stories that somehow got mashed together in one book. Genesis 1 comes from a different tradition than Genesis 2, likely written by different groups, in different times, for different reasons. Well, it forces us to question the idea that the Bible is a seamless, flawless narrative. If you've been told that the Bible is one consistent story from start to finish, these two creation accounts throw a wrench in that idea. They suggest something much more complex. Something that doesn't quite fit into the neat little package we've been sold for centuries. These stories weren't just dropped out of heaven. They were written by people with different perspectives, different agendas. And for some reason, both got included in the final text. Now, let's talk about the names. In Genesis 1, the word used for God is Elohim. It's a powerful, commanding title. But here's where it gets interesting. Elohim is actually a plural word. That's right, plural. But don't get too caught up thinking there were multiple gods running around, because the verb forms in the Hebrew text are singular. What's going on here? Why use a plural word for a singular god? Some scholars argue that this points back to ancient Israelite beliefs, before they became strictly monotheistic. Elohim might have been a leftover from a time when people believed in many gods but focused on just one. Kind of like a transition phase in their theology. Think about it, polytheistic cultures were everywhere in the ancient world. The Egyptians, the Babylonians, the Canaanites, gods all over the place. And then, right in the middle of it, the Israelites are carving out this idea of one supreme deity. But the language, the culture, it still carries traces of that earlier, polytheistic worldview. Now, fast forward to Genesis 2. The name shifts. Suddenly, it's not just Elohim, it's Yahweh Elohim, Lord God in most English translations. This isn't just a change in title, it's a change in the entire vibe. Yahweh is personal. It's the covenant name, the name God gives when he's making a promise to his people. So what's the deal with these two names? Why does the Bible use two different terms for God? The answer might lie in the source materials. You see, Genesis 1 is thought to come from a priestly tradition. A group focused on structure, order, the big cosmic picture. Genesis 2 comes from a different tradition, the Yahwist tradition. These people were all about the personal relationship with God. Yahweh isn't just some distant deity, he's right there in the dirt, forming man from the dust, walking in the garden. This shift in language signals a shift in how God is being portrayed. So, we've got two different traditions, two different names for God, and two different ways of looking at creation. Elohim is the God of power, the God of the universe, the God who creates everything with a word. Yahweh is the God who is close, the God who gets involved, who walks with humanity. The Bible keeps both of these views side by side. But why? It's not a mistake. It's not an oversight. These texts were compiled together for a reason. It reflects the evolution of how ancient people saw their relationship with the divine. Sometimes God is transcendent, above everything, and other times he's intimate, personal. The two stories, the two names, represent different aspects of how humans have understood the divine over time. Let's get into something even more intriguing, the sources behind these creation accounts. Because these two stories didn't just pop out of nowhere. They come from different traditions, different voices within ancient Israelite culture. And trust me, this changes everything about how we understand Genesis. What we're looking at here is something called the documentary hypothesis. I know, that sounds academic, but stay with me, it's actually fascinating. This theory suggests that the first 5 books of the Bible, including Genesis, weren't written by just one person, like Moses, but by different authors from different time periods. These texts were later stitched together to create what we now call the Torah. So let's break this down. Genesis 1. That's typically attributed to what scholars call the P-source, or priestly source. These guys were all about order, hierarchy, and ritual. Their creation story reflects that everything happens in a structured, step-by-step process over 6 days. It's almost liturgical, like a cosmic temple is being built. That's why Genesis 1 feels so formal, so distant. It's God as a supreme architect, designing the universe with precise, deliberate actions. But Genesis 2, that's a whole different vibe. It's from what's called the J-source, or Yahwist source. The Yahwist writers weren't priests, they were storytellers. They weren't interested in the big cosmic picture as much as the personal, human experience. That's why the God in Genesis 2 feels so much closer, more involved. He's not just speaking things into existence from a distance. He's shaping Adam with his hands, breathing life into him, walking in the garden. This is a God who's present, who interacts directly with humanity. These 2 sources didn't come from the same time period. The Yahwist tradition is older, probably written during the early days of the monarchy in Israel, maybe around the time of King David. Meanwhile, the priestly source comes later, after the Israelites were exiled to Babylon. So, these are 2 distinct versions of Israelite history and belief, written centuries apart. Why does this matter? Because it shows that the Bible wasn't just written in a vacuum. It was shaped by the political, social, and religious circumstances of its time. The priestly writers were living through the Babylonian exile, a traumatic, world-shattering event. Their creation story reflects a desire for order in the face of chaos. It's no wonder their God is so powerful, so in control. But the Yahwist, their world was different. They were focused on the intimate relationship between God and his people, because they were in a period of growth, nation-building. And yet, these 2 sources, despite their differences, were both preserved, woven together into the Genesis we have today. Why? Because they both offered something important. One gave a vision of divine power, the other gave a sense of divine closeness. And that's what makes this so radical. The Bible isn't one unified voice, it's a conversation. A debate, even, between different groups with different perspectives on who God is and how the world came to be. Alright, let's talk about Adam and Eve, specifically, the strange way they show up in these 2 different creation accounts. Now, if you've read Genesis 1, you might have noticed something interesting. Man and woman are created at the same time. Male and female, he created them. Boom. Done. It's quick, it's clean, and there's no mention of Adam or Eve specifically. They're just created together, both in the image of God. It almost feels like a statement of equality, right? But then we get to Genesis 2, and suddenly, the whole story changes. Here, Adam is created first. He's formed from the dust of the earth, given the breath of life, and placed in the Garden of Eden. Eve doesn't show up until later, and how is she made? She's created from Adam's rib, essentially, part of him. Now, this isn't just a minor narrative difference. It's a huge shift in the way humanity is framed. Here's the thing, Genesis 1 almost feels progressive by ancient standards. Man and woman, both made in God's image, both created together. But Genesis 2? That's a whole different story, literally. In this version, Adam is central. Eve is an afterthought, created to solve a problem, Adam's loneliness. And let's not sugarcoat it, this is where a lot of the traditional patriarchal views come from, the idea that woman was created for man, secondary to man. This version of creation has been used for centuries to justify everything from gender roles to societal hierarchies. But should it? Scholars have argued that Genesis 2 was likely written to reflect a more patriarchal worldview that developed later in Israelite society. It wasn't just about telling the story of creation, it was about reinforcing the social structures of the time. By making Eve an extension of Adam, The story sets up a narrative where women are seen as dependent on men, created for men. It's subtle, but it's powerful. And this might explain why the two accounts were kept together despite their differences. The priestly account in Genesis 1 could represent an older, possibly more egalitarian tradition. But the Yahwist account in Genesis 2 reflects a society where men were dominant, and women's roles were defined by their relationship to men. Now, let's dig into something that really messes with the way we usually think about the Bible, the order of creation. If you've been paying attention, the timeline in Genesis 1 is pretty straightforward. God creates the universe in 6 days, and everything happens in a clear sequence, first the heavens and the earth, then plants, animals, and finally, on day 6, humanity. It's orderly. It makes sense. But flip over to Genesis 2, and suddenly, the order's all over the place. In this account, Adam is created first, before any plants or animals. The whole setup feels less structured and more reactive. God forms Adam from the ground, then realizes Adam needs food, so he makes plants. Then he notices Adam is lonely, so he creates animals, and when that doesn't work out, finally, he creates Eve. It's like the creation story just went from a perfectly executed plan to a series of on-the-fly decisions. Why the shift in focus? Why does Genesis 2 feel so, messy, compared to the clean structure of Genesis 1? One possible explanation is that Genesis 2 isn't trying to tell the same kind of story. Genesis 1 is this grand, cosmic narrative. It's God zoomed out, creating the whole universe with a word. But Genesis 2, this is God zoomed in. It's all about humanity, specifically about Adam. This story isn't interested in the stars or the galaxies. It's focused on the earth, on the garden, on this one man, and, eventually, this one woman. It's like going from the big picture to the personal details. But there's more to it than just a different perspective. The sequence in Genesis 2 actually changes the entire dynamic of creation. In Genesis 1, humanity is the climax, the final piece of the puzzle. The world is prepared for us, and we are placed in it. But in Genesis 2, Adam is the starting point. He's the first thing created, and everything else, plants, animals, Eve, exists because of him, for him. It's a totally different way of seeing humanity's role in the world. Instead of being part of creation, Adam becomes the reason for creation. The universe revolves around him. This shift in focus might also hint at something deeper. In ancient cultures, creation stories weren't just about explaining how the world began, they were about defining humanity's place in it. Genesis 1 gives us a picture of humans as caretakers of the world, made in the image of God, responsible for the earth, but still part of the grand scheme of things. But Genesis 2? It makes humanity the center of the story. It's a narrative about control, about dominance. Adam is literally formed from the ground, and then everything else is made to suit him. What does that tell us? It suggests that these two stories are coming from very different worldviews. Genesis 1 is about harmony between humanity and creation, while Genesis 2 is about humanity's dominance over creation. And again, these two accounts are sitting right next to each other in the Bible, even though they're clearly not on the same page when it comes to what creation is all about. It's almost like these two stories are competing visions of what it means to be human. One sees us as part of a larger, balanced world. The other puts us at the center, with everything else revolving around us. And what's fascinating is that, for thousands of years, both of these stories have been preserved together, even though they offer such different perspectives. Let's dive deeper into something that might completely change the way you look at Genesis, the influence of older, ancient creation myths. Because here's the thing, the stories in Genesis didn't just appear out of nowhere. They didn't come from a vacuum. There were other civilizations around ancient Israel, and they had their own creation stories long before the Bible was written. So, when we look at Genesis, we need to ask, how much of it was influenced by these older myths? Let's start with one of the biggest parallels, the Enuma Elish. This is the Babylonian creation myth, and it's pretty wild. In this story, the god Marduk slays a chaos monster named Tiamat and uses her body to create the world. Sound familiar? It should, because Genesis 1 starts with God bringing order to the chaos, the formless and void earth, with darkness over the deep waters. The idea of a primeval watery chaos that needs to be tamed is a theme that's shared across many ancient cultures. And the Enuma Elish? It's centuries older than Genesis. Some scholars argue that Genesis 1 is a response to these older creation myths, especially those from Mesopotamia and Babylon. Instead of multiple gods fighting for control, like in the Enuma Elish, Genesis gives us one God, Elohim, who creates the world with purpose and order, without conflict. But the bones of the story, the idea of creating from chaos, are eerily similar. Let's talk about the Epic of Atrahasis, another ancient Mesopotamian story. In this one, the gods create humans from clay, and you get this, they do it to relieve the gods from the burden of labor. Humans are made to do the work the gods don't want to do. Now, jump to Genesis 2. God forms Adam from the dust of the ground. Then, what does he do? He places Adam in the Garden of Eden to work it and take care of it. It's almost like the Bible took this older theme, the creation of humans to tend the earth, and adapted it into a more personal story about man's relationship with God. The Garden of Eden itself seems to echo another ancient place, Dilmun, the paradise from Sumerian mythology. In the Sumerian story, Dilmun is a land where everything is pure, where there's no sickness, no death, and where the gods live in harmony. The parallels to Eden are hard to ignore. Both are places of perfection, where the first humans are placed to live in peace, until something happens that causes them to lose that perfect life. So, what's really going on here? Is Genesis just a retelling of these older myths? Not quite. But what we're seeing is that the biblical writers were clearly influenced by the stories around them. They took pieces of these ancient myths and reworked them into something new, something that fit their understanding of God and humanity. Genesis isn't just a standalone creation story, it's part of a larger conversation that was happening in the ancient world about where we come from and what our role is in the universe. Now, some people get uncomfortable with the idea that the Bible might have borrowed from older stories. But here's the thing, this actually makes the text more interesting, not less. It shows that the biblical writers were engaged with the world around them, responding to the stories and ideas of their time. They weren't just copying, they were redefining what creation meant, what God's relationship to the world looked like. What if Genesis was never meant to be a single, unified story? What if the Bible is intentionally presenting us with multiple beginnings, multiple ways of seeing the world, humanity, and God? We've spent this whole time digging into the differences between Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, the contrasting names for God, the different orders of creation, the cultural influences from older myths, but here's the real kicker, maybe these differences aren't mistakes. Maybe they're the whole point. Why would ancient Israelite scribes include two different creation stories, back to back, if they were just trying to give us one straightforward account? They could have easily picked one version and stuck with it. But they didn't. They kept both stories, knowing full well that they didn't perfectly line up. And here's why that matters, Genesis isn't just telling us how the world was made, it's inviting us into a conversation about what creation means. In Genesis 1, you've got this God who is all-powerful, speaking the universe into existence with cosmic authority. It's orderly, it's grand, and it's awe-inspiring. But in Genesis 2, you get a more intimate picture, God forming man with his own hands, walking in the garden, personally involved in humanity's story. Two very different views of creation, but each one gives us a glimpse into a different aspect of who God is. By including both stories, the Bible is saying something profound. There isn't just one way to understand the divine. It's offering us multiple perspectives, because God, creation, and our place in the world are too big, too complex, to be captured by just one narrative. And here's where it gets even deeper. Throughout the rest of the Bible, we see this pattern over and over again, different voices, different perspectives, sometimes even different versions of the same story. The Bible isn't afraid of tension or contradiction. It's not about locking us into one single interpretation. It's about inviting us to wrestle with the text, to ask questions, to explore the mystery of God and creation. So, what does this all mean for us? It means that when we read Genesis, we are not just looking for answers. We're engaging with a rich, multi-layered story that challenges us to think bigger, to embrace complexity, and to see the divine in new and unexpected ways. And that's where we'll leave it today. Thank you so much for sticking around and watching until the end. If you found this discussion as fascinating as we have, make sure to like the video, leave a comment with your thoughts, and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on the next deep dive into these mind-blowing topics. As always, we appreciate each and every one of you for your support. God bless you all, and we'll see you in the next video. What happens when a nation demands a leader not because he is wise, but because he looks the part? When people cry out for a ruler to save them, only to realize too late that power without purpose is a curse. This is the story of King Saul, a man who had the height, the strength, and the presence of a king, yet lacked the heart to carry the weight of his throne. Israel was desperate, surrounded by enemies, fractured from within, and weary of the unseen rule of God. They wanted something tangible, something they could see, touch, and rally behind. They wanted a king, just like the nations around them, and when Saul, tall and imposing, stood before them, they believed they had found their savior. But they had mistaken appearance for anointing, and in their impatience they would pay the price. This is not just an ancient story, it's the story of today. How often do we clamor for leaders who promise strength but deliver fear? How often do nations in their desperation elevate figures who reflect their insecurities rather than their ideals? Saul's rise and fall is a lesson that echoes through history, from ancient Israel to modern presidencies and failing governments. As we journey through the dramatic rise and tragic fall of Israel's first king, ask yourself, what happens when we choose what looks right over what is right? What is the cost of ignoring the warnings in pursuit of a ruler who tells us what we want to hear? If this video on Deep Bible Stories challenges the way you see leadership, share it with those who need to hear it. And for those who want to dive deeper, check out our ebooks, where we explore powerful biblical lessons in even greater depth. Timestamps are in the description so you can revisit key moments anytime. Now let's step back into history to a nation on the brink of transformation and a king who was everything they wanted, but not what they needed. The day Saul was crowned should have been a moment of triumph, a celebration of Israel's newfound strength, but beneath the surface, cracks had already begun to form. The people had demanded a king, and God had given them exactly what they asked for. Yet even as Saul stood before them, tall, handsome, every inch the warrior king they had envisioned, there was something unsettling about his rise. Unlike David, who would come after him, Saul did not grow into his kingship. He was handed power, not because he had earned it, but because the people insisted on it. And power given too soon is often power misused. Israel's desperation for a king was rooted in fear. The Philistines, the Ammonites, and countless other enemies loomed at their borders. The judges who once led them were fading into history. And Samuel, their last great prophet, was aging. They wanted security. They wanted a figurehead. And so, despite Samuel's warnings, they cried out, "Give us a king to lead us." 1 Samuel 8:6. Samuel's heart broke. He knew what they were asking for. They weren't just rejecting him. They were rejecting God as their ruler. But still, God allowed it. Listen to them and give them a king, he told Samuel. 1 Samuel 8:22. It was a divine concession, not a divine endorsement. And to Saul, a young man from the tribe of Benjamin, searching for lost donkeys, unaware that his life was about to change forever. The moment he met Samuel, the prophet anointed him, pouring oil over his head and declaring him king. 1 Samuel 10:1. Saul had not campaigned for the throne. He had not won battles to prove his worth. He had simply been chosen because the people wanted someone they could see, someone who looked like a king. But something was wrong from the beginning. When the time came for Saul to be revealed to the nation, he was nowhere to be found. The man who was supposed to lead them was hiding among the baggage. 1 Samuel 10:22. It was an omen, one that foreshadowed the insecurity that would define his rule. At first, Saul's reign was marked by victory. He led Israel to a decisive win against the Ammonites, proving himself as a capable warrior. 1 Samuel 11:11. The people cheered. They had their king, and for a moment it seemed that their choice had been justified. But leadership is not just about winning battles, it's about wisdom, about obedience, about knowing when to trust in God rather than in oneself. And that was where Saul would fail. His first test came soon enough. The Philistines gathered against Israel with overwhelming force, and Saul's army, seeing the odds stacked against them, began to scatter. Samuel had instructed Saul to wait for him before making a sacrifice to seek God's favor, but the pressure was too much. The people were leaving, the enemy was advancing, and Saul, desperate to hold his army together, took matters into his own hands. He made the sacrifice himself, something only a prophet was permitted to do. 1 Samuel 13:8-12. The moment Samuel arrived, he saw what had happened. "You have done a foolish thing," he told Saul. "You have not kept the command the Lord your God gave you." And with that, the verdict was passed. Now your kingdom will not endure. 1 Samuel 13:13-14. Imagine this in today's world. A leader given immense power cracks under pressure and oversteps his bounds. He bends the rules for the sake of public approval, believing that the ends justify the means. And when he is confronted, he justifies his actions rather than repents. Sound familiar? History is full of Saul-like figures, leaders who begin with promise, but crumble under the weight of their own insecurity and disobedience. Saul had been given everything: a throne, a kingdom, the anointing of God. But from the very beginning, he ruled out of fear rather than faith. And when fear governs a leader, destruction is inevitable. What happens when a king rules for the people's approval instead of for God's purpose? What happens when power is given too soon, before character has been tested? Saul's story is a warning, a mirror reflecting the dangers of leadership that is built on appearance rather than obedience. As we move forward, we will see how Saul's downfall was not the result of a single mistake, but of a pattern of compromise, of arrogance, and of a heart that refused to fully submit to God. Saul's downfall did not happen in a single moment. It was not one great catastrophe that ended his reign, but rather a series of cracks, small acts of disobedience, unchecked pride, and an ever-growing fear of losing control. And this is the most haunting part of Saul's story. He could have been great, he had the anointing, he had the power, but he lacked one thing: the heart to trust God completely. The true unraveling of Saul began with a mission, one that should have secured his legacy as a faithful king. God commanded Saul, through the prophet Samuel, to completely destroy the Amalekites. Every man, woman, child, and even their livestock. 1 Samuel 15:3. This was not senseless violence, it was divine justice. The Amalekites were a nation that had terrorized Israel for generations, and God had decreed their destruction long before Saul's time. Exodus 17:14. This was Saul's moment to prove his obedience. But power breeds compromise. Saul did as he was told, partially. He attacked the Amalekites and won the battle, but instead of fully obeying God's command, he spared King Agag and the best of the livestock. 1 Samuel 15:9. He convinced himself that keeping the spoils of war was a better idea than following God's instructions. And when Samuel confronted him, Saul did what weak leaders always do. He shifted the blame. The soldiers took the sheep and cattle, he said, to custody, to sacrifice to the Lord, your God. 1 Samuel 15:15. It sounded spiritual, it sounded reasonable, but it was disobedience wrapped in religious justification. Saul had not kept God's command, and no excuse could make up for that. Samuel's response cut through every lie, every justification, and every attempt to cover up disobedience with religious ritual. Does the Lord delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as much as in obeying the Lord? To obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed is better than the fat of rams. 1 Samuel 15:22. And then came the verdict. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has rejected you as king. 1 Samuel 15:23. At that moment, Saul's fate was sealed. His reign would continue for years, but his anointing was gone. The Spirit of the Lord departed from him, and an evil spirit came in its place. 1 Samuel 16:14. The man who had once been chosen by God was now tormented, haunted by his own failures, his own fears, and the knowledge that his throne would one day be given to another. Imagine a leader today who is given every opportunity, power, resources, and even divine favor, yet throws it away because of fear and compromise. We have seen it in history. Kings, presidents, CEOs, people who start with promise but end in paranoia, unable to let go of the power they were never meant to hold forever. And that is what happened to Saul the moment he realized that God had chosen another. David, a shepherd boy with a heart after God. Saul's fear consumed him. Instead of repenting, he resisted. Instead of surrendering, he schemed. He could have used his remaining years to prepare the next generation, to mentor David, to bow to God's plan. But Saul's pride wouldn't allow it. What follows in the next chapters is the story of a man unraveling before our eyes. He becomes obsessed with David, paranoid that the young warrior will take his throne. He throws spears at him, chases him through the wilderness, and slaughters innocent priests in a desperate attempt to cling to power. 1 Samuel 22:17-19. The tragedy of Saul is that his enemy was never David. His enemy was never the Philistines. His enemy was himself. How many times have we seen this story play out? Leaders who refuse to step aside, clinging to their positions long after their time is up. Pastors who begin with humility but become consumed with their own influence. Politicians who start with good intentions but end in scandal because they fear losing control. Saul is a warning to every person in leadership. If God calls you, serve with obedience, but if he removes you, step aside with grace. Saul never learned this lesson, and because of that his story would end in ruin. There comes a moment in every downfall when the writing is on the wall, yet the one who is falling refuses to see it. This is the terrifying reality of King Saul. He had already been rejected by God, already stripped of divine favor, but he was still seated on the throne, still wearing the crown, still wielding authority. But Saul was no longer ruling, he was unraveling. The man who once led with confidence was now tormented by his own insecurities. The chosen warrior who once stood head and shoulders above Israel now lived in the shadows of his own fears, and his greatest fear had a name. David. It all started with a song. A simple song sung by the women of Israel after David's victory over Goliath. Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands. 1 Samuel 18:7. At first, it was just a line in a melody, a celebration of victory, but to Saul, it was a prophecy, a threat, a nightmare that he could not escape. He replayed those words over and over in his mind until they became the anthem of his downfall. They credit David with tens of thousands, but me with only thousands. What more can he get but the kingdom? 1 Samuel 18:8. That was the moment Saul turned from a king into a paranoid tyrant, the moment he let jealousy consume him, the moment he set his sights on destroying the very man God had chosen to succeed him. And so began Saul's descent into madness. The first attempt on David's life was not made on a battlefield. It wasn't done in secrecy. It happened in Saul's own palace, right in the middle of his court. David had been invited into Saul's inner circle. He played the harp to soothe the king's tormented mind, calming him when the darkness of his soul became too much to bear. But this time, the music wasn't enough. Saul sat on his throne, gripping his spear, his knuckles white, his heart pounding. The room was filled with music, yet his mind was filled with rage. The song of the women echoed in his head. Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands. The words taunted him, and then, in a moment of blind fury, Saul raised his spear and hurled it at David's head. David moved just in time. The spear embedded itself into the wall behind him. The room fell silent. Saul's breath was heavy. His vision was clouded with anger. David locked eyes with the man he had once admired. This was no longer the noble king who had led Israel into battle. This was something else, something broken. And then David ran. That was only the beginning. Saul would not stop at one failed attempt. He would try again and again. He sent David into battle, hoping the Philistines would kill him. He promised his daughter in marriage, using it as a trap. He sent assassins to David's house in the dead of night. And when all of that failed, he did something that would seal his fate forever. He ordered the slaughter of God's priests. David had fled to Nob, where Ahimelech the priest provided him with food, and Goliath's sword. He had no idea that by helping David, he was signing his own death sentence. Saul, now fully consumed by his paranoia, summoned Ahimelech and his fellow priests. His voice trembled with rage as he accused them of conspiracy. "Why have you conspired against me, you and the son of Jesse?" 1 Samuel 22:13. Ahimelech pleaded his innocence. He had only done what he had always done, helped a servant of the king. But Saul was beyond reason. "You will surely die, Ahimelech, you and your whole family." 1 Samuel 22:16. And with those words, Saul gave the most horrifying order of his reign. "Kill the priest of the Lord." 1 Samuel 22:17. Even Saul's own guards hesitated. They knew this was wrong. They knew this was madness. But there was one man willing to carry out the order, Doeg the Edomite. 85 priests were slaughtered that day. Their blood ran through the temple like a river. An entire city was wiped out, all because of Saul's desperate obsession with David. This was not just an act of cruelty. This was a declaration of war against God himself, and God would not let it go unanswered. From that moment on, Saul's life was not about ruling. It was about chasing David. While Israel needed a king, their king was leading armies in a manhunt. While the Philistines threatened their borders, Saul was too busy tracking his own perceived enemy. Twice David had the chance to kill Saul, once in a cave, and once when he sneaked into Saul's camp while he slept. Twice David spared his life. I will not lay my hand on my Lord, because he is the Lord's anointed. 1 Samuel 24:10. Saul wept both times. He knew David was the rightful king. He knew God had chosen him, but Saul was too far gone. His paranoia was too deep, his desperation too strong, and so he kept chasing, kept running, kept destroying himself. But the end was coming. The crown that he refused to surrender would soon be stripped from him in the most humiliating way possible. A king who started with power now spiraled into madness. A man chosen by God, now abandoned by him. A ruler who should have led his people now hunted the very one who would save them. Saul was running out of time, and the final chapter of his life would be the darkest one yet. This is more than a history lesson. Saul's story is being repeated even today. How many leaders start with promise only to be consumed by fear? How many politicians begin with noble intentions only to compromise for the sake of power? How many pastors begin with humility only to be undone by pride? Power is not inherently evil, but the fear of losing it can turn even the most anointed leader into a monster. Saul's story is a warning that the moment we place our trust in power instead of God, we have already begun to fall. Where do you see Saul's story in the world today? Where do you see it in yourself? As we prepare to witness the final chapter of Saul's life, ask yourself, what happens when a man who refuses to bow before God is finally forced to face him? The answer is coming. The end is near. There comes a moment in every downfall when even the proudest man realizes he is alone. The voices that once praised him have fallen silent. The allies he once relied on have abandoned him. The power he once wielded now feels like an illusion slipping through his fingers. For King Saul, this was that moment. His paranoia had driven him to the brink of madness. His obsession with David had distracted him from leading his people. His murder of God's priests had severed his connection to the divine. And now, the Philistine army was on the move again, marching toward Israel with overwhelming force. Saul stood on the battlefield of Gilboa, looking out at the enemy's vast encampment. Thousands of Philistine warriors, their banners waving in the wind, their swords glinting under the moonlight. He could hear the distant sound of their war cries, the pounding of their war drums. And for the first time in his reign, Saul felt something he had not felt before. Utter powerless fear. He had always been afraid, of course, afraid of losing his throne, afraid of David, afraid of the whispers of betrayal in his court. But this was different. This was a fear that gripped him from the inside, a fear that told him, you are no longer the king you once were. You are no longer chosen. You are no longer protected. In the past, Saul would have turned to the prophet Samuel for guidance. Samuel, the man who had anointed him, the man who had once been his greatest supporter and his harshest critic. But Samuel was dead, and God was silent. Saul called for the priests, he called for the prophets, he called for the sacred Urim and Thummim, the divine stones used to discern God's will. But there was no answer, no dream, no vision, no prophecy. For the first time in his life, Saul truly understood what it meant to be abandoned by God. When Samuel had told him years ago, because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has rejected you as king. Saul had still been on the throne. He had still had his army. He had still heard from God, even if the words were ones of judgment. But now even judgment was gone. Now there was only silence, and Saul could not bear it. He needed to hear something, anything. He needed direction. He needed reassurance. He needed to know what would happen to him, to Israel, to his kingdom. And if God would not speak to him, he would find someone who would. Find me a medium, Saul ordered. The room fell into a stunned silence. The very man who had outlawed witchcraft and sorcery in Israel was now seeking a witch. The very king who had driven out the occult from the land was now looking to embrace it. His men hesitated. They knew the law. They knew the punishment for consulting the dead. But Saul was desperate, and desperation turns even the strongest convictions into dust. One of his servants stepped forward. "There is a woman in Endor," he whispered, "of a witch, a necromancer, a woman who had managed to escape Saul's purge of sorcery and still practiced her dark arts in secret." Saul did not hesitate. He disguised himself in common clothing, shedding the royal robes that once set him apart as king. Under the cover of night, with only 2 men by his side, he rode to Endor, crossing enemy lines to seek a power he once condemned. This was not the journey of a king. This was the journey of a man who had lost everything. The woman in Endor did not recognize Saul when he entered her dwelling. She was wary, suspicious. She had lived in hiding for years, and now suddenly a stranger came asking her to summon the dead. "You know what Saul has done," she warned. "He has cut off the mediums and spiritists from the land. Why are you trying to trap me?" Saul swore an oath in the name of the Lord, the very God he had abandoned. "As surely as the Lord lives, you will not be punished for this." A tragic irony. The king who once swore by God's name to uphold righteousness now swore by that same name to protect a witch. The woman hesitated but finally agreed. She sat before her altar, closed her eyes, and began her ritual. The room darkened. The air grew heavy. And then something happened that even she did not expect. She screamed. The medium had spent years conjuring spirits, speaking to whatever shadowy figures came in response to her rituals, but this time she saw something different, something real. "I see a god coming up out of the earth," she cried. "What does he look like?" Saul demanded. "An old man wearing a robe is coming up." Saul's breath caught in his throat. Samuel, the prophet he had spent his life trying to please, the prophet who had once guided him, the prophet who had ultimately condemned him. And now, standing before him, was the ghost of the man who had spoken for God. But Saul did not receive comfort. He did not receive direction. He received judgment. "Why have you disturbed me by bringing me up?" Samuel's spirit demanded. Saul fell to the ground. His voice trembled as he spoke. "I am in great distress. The Philistines are fighting against me, and God has departed from me. He no longer answers me, either by prophets or by dreams. So I have called on you to tell me what to do." For a brief moment there was silence. Then Samuel's voice echoed through the chamber, heavy with finality. "Why do you consult me, now that the Lord has departed from you and become your enemy?" Saul's heart pounded. "The Lord has torn the kingdom out of your hands and given it to one of your neighbors, to David." The final confirmation. The throne was no longer his. His kingdom, his legacy, his power. It all belonged to David now. And worse, Samuel's voice carried one more prophecy, one more sentence. "The Lord will deliver Israel and you into the hands of the Philistines, and tomorrow you and your sons will be with me." Tomorrow Saul would die. Tomorrow the battle would be lost. Tomorrow Israel's first king would fall by his own sword. Saul collapsed. His body trembled. His spirit was shattered. He had come seeking reassurance, and he had received his death sentence. His men had to lift him off the ground. They begged him to eat, but he had no appetite. What was the point? He had already been eaten alive by his own fate. As Saul rode back into the night, his disguise no longer mattered. His crown no longer mattered. His army no longer mattered. All that remained was the promise of death, And as the first rays of sunlight broke over the horizon, King Saul rode toward his final battle, knowing that before the sun set again, he would be nothing more than a name in history, a warning to all who place power above God. The end had come. The night had been long. The weight of Samuel's prophecy pressed on Saul's chest like a crushing stone. The witch of Endor had told him nothing comforting, nothing hopeful, only the bitter truth. Tomorrow, you and your sons will be with me. Tomorrow, that word lingered in his mind as the first streaks of dawn lit up the sky over Mount Gilboa. The valley below was already stirring with movement. The Philistine army, vast and merciless, was preparing for war. Their banners stretched across the horizon, their swords flashing in the early light. Their chariots gleamed, their war horses stamped impatiently against the ground. The sound of their battle horns pierced the air, a haunting signal that the end had come. Saul gripped his sword, his knuckles white. His sons, Jonathan, Abinadab, and Malchishua, stood beside him, their faces grim. The soldiers of Israel looked to their king, waiting for orders. But what could he say? How could he inspire them when he knew this battle was already lost? There would be no divine intervention, no voice from heaven commanding, "Go forth, for I am with you," because God had departed from him. And now the day of reckoning had arrived. The Philistines moved like an unstoppable tide, their warriors descending upon Saul's army with terrifying force. Arrows rained down like deadly hail, striking men before they could even lift their shields. The Israelites scrambled to form ranks, but panic spread quickly. The enemy's war cries drowned out the shouts of their commanders. Jonathan fought with the fierce courage that had once made him one of Israel's greatest warriors. His sword slashed through enemy ranks, cutting down Philistines with every strike. But the Philistines were too many. Saul watched in horror as his men fell one by one. His army, the army he had led to so many victories in his youth, was being slaughtered before his very eyes. And then the unthinkable happened. A spear found its mark. Jonathan, his son, his heir, the warrior who had once trusted God more than Saul himself, staggered as the weapon pierced his side. Saul's heart clenched. Jonathan! But there was no saving him. Jonathan collapsed onto the blood-stained earth. His breath came in short, ragged gasps as he struggled to stay upright. For years, Jonathan had been the hope of Israel, the prince who should have ruled after Saul. He had fought with unwavering faith, even when his father had fallen into darkness. And now he lay dying on the battlefield. Saul's other sons, Abinadab and Malchishua, fell soon after. His entire lineage was being wiped out before his eyes. The battle was lost, but Saul could not bring himself to flee. He could not allow himself to be captured, paraded through the streets of Philistia, mocked, humiliated. There was only one path left for Israel's first king. Saul stood alone, his armor dented, his body bruised, his mind shattered. His men had been routed, his sons were dead, and his kingdom was in ruins. So now the Philistines were closing in. Saul turned to his armor-bearer, a young man who had followed him loyally, even as his leadership crumbled. "Draw your sword and kill me," Saul commanded, "before these uncircumcised Philistines come and abuse me." The young man's eyes widened in horror. Kill the king? Even now, even in the face of certain death, he could not bring himself to do it. "I cannot," he whispered, stepping back. Saul let out a bitter laugh. Even now, he was alone. Even now, he could trust no one. His hands trembled as he grasped his own sword, the same blade that had won him so many victories in his youth. Slowly, he turned the tip toward himself. The king who had once stood head and shoulders above every man in Israel. The warrior who had been anointed by Samuel. The ruler who had been given everything and lost it all. Closed his eyes and fell upon his own sword. The Philistines found Saul's body among the fallen. For them, this was more than victory. This was a triumph over the God of Israel. They severed Saul's head from his body. They took his armor and placed it in the temple of their god Dagon as a trophy, a mockery of the once mighty king. His body, along with the bodies of his sons, was hung on the walls of Beth-shan, displayed like trophies, a warning to anyone who dared oppose the Philistines. Back in Israel, when the people of Jabesh-Gilead heard what had happened, their hearts were broken. This was the same Saul who had once saved them, who had led them to victory in their time of greatest need. And now he was dead. The men of Jabesh-Gilead risked their lives to retrieve Saul's body. They traveled under the cover of darkness, entered enemy territory, and carefully took down the remains of their fallen king and his sons. They brought them back home. They burned their bodies, a rare act for Israelites, but one done out of desperation to prevent further desecration. Then they took their bones and buried them under a tamarisk tree. And for 7 days they mourned. For all his failures, Saul had been their king, and now he was gone. Saul's death was not just the end of a man, it was the end of an era. He had been the king Israel wanted, a warrior, a man of power, someone who looked the part. But he had not been the king they needed. He had ruled with fear instead of faith. He had sought control instead of surrender. He had trusted in his own strength rather than in the God who had placed him on the throne. And in the end he had died as he had lived, isolated, afraid, and without the voice of God to guide him. But his story was not the end of Israel's story. Because even as Saul's body was laid to rest, the man who would take his place was waiting in the shadows. David, the shepherd, the fugitive, the man after God's own heart, the rise of Israel's true king was about to begin. Saul's story is a tragic reminder of what happens when we let fear drive us instead of faith. His life was filled with moments of greatness, moments where he could have turned back, moments where he could have chosen obedience over control. But in the end, his unwillingness to trust God led to his downfall. If this deep dive into the rise and fall of King Saul has given you new insight, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Don't forget to check out our ebooks for more biblical explorations. And remember, timestamps are in the description, so you can revisit these lessons anytime. A new king is coming.
Hello everyone. Have you ever wondered how a mysterious wife in the Bible could have such a significant impact on one of Israel's greatest leaders? This is the story of Zipporah, Moses' first wife. Why is she so rarely mentioned in the Bible, despite playing such an important role? Imagine this. A woman from the Midianite people, not part of the Israelite community, was able to save Moses' life in a life-threatening situation. Have you ever wondered why Moses, the leader of Israel, came under God's anger, and why his wife Zipporah had to intervene to save him from death? Is this story really as simple as we might think? In today's video, we will delve into the mysterious story of Zipporah. We will explore her cultural background, the crucial role she played in Moses' mission, and the challenges she faced as the wife of one of the most significant figures in biblical history. The controversial moments and mysteries surrounding her will make you rethink what you think you know about the Bible. If you're ready to explore the hidden depth of Zipporah's story, don't go away. Be sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with your friends so we can discover these fascinating insights together. And don't forget to leave your questions or thoughts in the comments section. We always welcome your feedback and queries. Let's grow together in wisdom and understanding. Zipporah first appears in the Bible in the book of Exodus, at a pivotal time in Moses' life. After fleeing Egypt to escape Pharaoh's wrath, Moses arrived in Midian, where he met the 7 daughters of Jethro, also known as Reuel, a priest of Midian, a people descended from Abraham through his second wife, Keturah, Genesis 25 verse 1 to 2. This was a nomadic people living in the region of modern-day Arabia. The encounter between Zipporah and Moses took place in a dramatic scene at a well, a location often associated with significant encounters in the Bible, such as Isaac's meeting with his wife Rebekah, Genesis 24:11 to 20, or Jacob's meeting with his wife Rachel, Genesis 29:9 to 10. Wells in the ancient Near East were vital for gathering water, but they were also social gathering spots. In Exodus 2:16 to 21, it is recorded, "Now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came and drew water, and filled the troughs to water their father's flock. Then the shepherds came and drove them away, but Moses stood up and helped them, and watered their flock." Moses agreed to stay with Jethro, and he married Jethro's daughter Zipporah. In this passage, we see Moses, though a stranger in a foreign land, immediately stepping into the role of protector and provider. The shepherds who tried to drive away Jethro's daughters represent a common challenge women of that time faced, especially in a patriarchal society where men dominated public spaces. Moses' courageous act of defending the women and helping them complete their task shows his inherent sense of justice and foreshadows his future role as the deliverer of Israel. This encounter also marks the beginning of the relationship between Moses and Zipporah, which began not with a grand introduction, but with a simple, heroic act of kindness. When the daughters returned home earlier than usual, their father Jethro was surprised and asked why they had returned so quickly. They explained that an Egyptian man, Moses, had rescued them from the shepherds and even watered their flock. This led Jethro to invite Moses into their home and welcome him warmly. This situation reflects the culture of the Middle Eastern nations, where inviting and welcoming strangers is a cherished tradition. This gesture also symbolizes the customs of the time, when marriages were often arranged, and daughters were given in marriage as a sign of alliance and gratitude. Zipporah, which means little bird in Hebrew, became the wife of Moses. This marriage was not just a relationship between a husband and wife, but, from another perspective, it marked Moses' integration into the Midianite society. If this story has inspired you and helped you feel closer to God, please hit like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos, where we will continue to explore more profound and grace-filled Bible stories from the Lord. By marrying Zipporah, Moses became part of Jethro's family, gaining protection, social status, and a new beginning after fleeing Egypt. Exodus 3:1 says, "Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God." This passage shows that Moses not only married Zipporah, but also took on responsibilities within her family, tending Jethro's flock, strengthening his relationship with Midianite society, and laying the foundation for his later return to Egypt as the chosen deliverer of God's people. Zipporah's legacy is intertwined with the ancient history of the Midianite people, a tribe descended from Abraham through his second wife, Keturah. The connection to Abraham places the Midianites within the family of larger nations, those born from the patriarchs. However, they maintained a distinct identity separate from the Israelites. Genesis 25:1 to 2 records, "Abraham took another wife, whose name was Keturah. She bore him Zimran, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua." This passage shows that Midian, the forefather of the Midianites, was one of the 6 children born to Abraham and Keturah. The descendants of these children, including Midian, formed separate tribes, each developing its own culture and beliefs. Although the Midianites were related by blood to the Israelites, they were regarded as outsiders in the broader biblical narrative. They were a nomadic tribe, famous for their pastoral lifestyle and movement through the barren lands of the Arabian Peninsula. This nomadic way of life influenced their cultural and religious practices. As the daughter of Jethro, a priest of Midian, Zipporah would have certainly been well educated in her people's religious traditions. In Exodus 18 verse 1 it is written, "Jethro, the priest of Midian and the father-in-law of Moses,
heard of all that God had done for Moses and for Israel, and how the Lord had brought Israel out of Egypt. Jethro's priesthood indicates that the Midianites had an organized system of worship, which likely included rituals and sacrifices. Though their practices differed from those of the Israelites, Jethro is described in the Bible as a wise man who feared God. This suggests that the Midianites also honored the Most High, even though their understanding and worship of him may have differed from that of the Israelite. Zipporah's Midianite heritage and her personal growth shaped her spiritual perspective and understanding. The Midianites, while still acknowledging the God of Abraham, may have incorporated other elements into their worship, a common practice in many ancient Near Eastern cultures. This foundation set them apart from the Israelites, who were bound by the covenant God established with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and later by the laws Moses received from God. The marriage between Moses and Zipporah would require them to face cultural and religious differences. Moses, who was raised as an Egyptian prince and later called by God to lead the Israelites, certainly had a clear understanding of God's covenant with Israel. Meanwhile, Zipporah brought with her the cultural influences of the Midianites into this marriage, creating a combination that could both complement and challenge them. Exodus 18:12 says, "Then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, brought a burnt offering and other sacrifices to God, and Aaron came with all the elders of Israel to eat bread with Moses' father-in-law before God." This passage describes a special moment in the Bible, marking a cultural and spiritual exchange of great significance. Jethro, a priest of Midian, offered sacrifices to God, and the participation of Aaron and the elders of Israel in this communal meal showed a moment of unity and mutual respect between two different cultures. Despite their religious and cultural differences, this event shows that cultures can harmonize and partake in religious rituals when they share a common reverence for God. Aaron and the elders of Israel participating in the ceremony with Jethro wasn't simply an intersection of religions, but a symbol of unity between communities, whether Israelite or Midianite. This moment also reflects the profound influence of Zipporah's family on Moses and Israel. As they participated in religious ceremonies together, it emphasized Zipporah's role and also the cultural integration that she and her family brought to Moses and the Israelite community. This was a powerful symbol of unity and mutual respect, transcending differences to move forward in the mission that God had entrusted. However, the differences between the Midianite and Israelite practices also created potential for conflict. For example, the Israelites worshipped only God, Yahweh, while the Midianites may have practiced a form of polytheism, incorporating multiple gods and various customs. This difference required Moses and Zipporah to find ways to balance their household, especially as Moses was being trained by God to lead Israel according to his commandments. In Numbers 25 1-3, it is written, "While Israel was staying in Shittim, the men began to indulge in sexual immorality with the Moabite women, who invited them to the sacrifices to their gods. The people ate the sacrificial meal and bowed down to these gods. So Israel yoked themselves to Baal of Peor, and the Lord's anger burned against them." This passage speaks about the Moabites, but it reflects a deeper, more common issue in the Israelite community: the negative influence of relationships with foreign women, particularly when such relationships led them into idolatry and behaviors contrary to the covenant God had established. Though the Bible does not indicate that Zipporah, Moses' wife, led him into idolatry, this story serves as a reminder of the cultural and religious tensions that could arise in any marriage between an Israelite and a foreign woman. The union of Moses and Zipporah, although not leading to a breach of the covenant or idolatry, remains a classic example of cultural and religious integration that could pose challenges in Israelite society. While Moses was the chosen leader to bring the Israelites out of Egypt and uphold God's covenant, Zipporah, being a Midianite, came from a different cultural and religious background. This raises a major issue regarding how to maintain religious purity in marriages between different nations, where differing cultural and religious elements could lead to conflict. The story of Zipporah, even though not directly related to idolatry, raises questions about the challenges Moses and his family may have faced in maintaining steadfast faith amidst religious differences. This highlights the uniqueness of Zipporah's story, as she was able to maintain her place in Moses' life without disrupting his mission or covenant with God. One of the most mysterious and controversial moments related to Zipporah occurs in the book of Exodus 4, where she plays a crucial role in a situation that could threaten Moses' life. This brief but dramatic story has puzzled scholars and theologians for centuries due to its enigmatic nature and the profound theological consequences it carries. In Exodus 4:24-26, it is written, "At a lodging place on the way, the Lord met Moses and was about to kill him. But Zipporah took a flint knife, cut off her son's foreskin, and touched Moses' feet with it, saying, 'Surely you are a bridegroom of blood to me.'" This passage describes a confusing situation where God, after commissioning Moses to lead the Israelites out of Egypt, suddenly wants to kill him. The reason for God's anger is not explicitly stated in the text, but many believe it was because Moses had not circumcised his son, a key sign of the covenant between God and his people. Genesis 17, verse 10-14. Genesis 17:10-11 says, "This is my covenant with you and your descendants, the covenant you are to keep. Every male among you shall be circumcised. You are to undergo circumcision, and it will be the sign of the covenant between me and you." Circumcision is a significant sign of identity for the Israelites and their covenant relationship with God, beginning with Abraham. Moses' failure to perform this rite for his son could be seen as neglecting an essential part of the faith and the covenant relationship that God established with the descendants of Abraham. This could be considered a serious violation, especially since Moses was the leader chosen by God to deliver his people. In the moment of God's anger, it was Zipporah who acted decisively. She took a flint knife, a tool often associated with purity and ritual in ancient cultures, and performed the circumcision herself. Her actions showed that she was fully aware of the covenant's requirements and understood the gravity of the situation, perhaps even more clearly than Moses at that moment. If you feel grateful and enlightened by this message, leave an amen in the comments to share with us the faith, love, and grace of God. Let's spread the spiritual light together and continue delivering profound messages that bring us closer to God and help us grow in faith. Zipporah's statement, "Surely you are a bridegroom of blood to me," has sparked much debate and has been interpreted in various ways by scholars. Although brief, this statement contains a complex mix of emotions, from anger to relief, and a profound acknowledgement of the covenant God established. Some scholars suggest that this statement reflects Zipporah's inner tension as she faced an extremely serious and painful situation where she had to make a decisive action regarding God's covenant with Israel. The phrase bridegroom of blood could be understood as an acknowledgement that the act of circumcision, while a ritual outwardly, was also a sign of deep commitment and participation in the covenant between God and his people. In the culture of that time, the shedding of blood during circumcision symbolized a sacred bond, marking a significant turning point in the relationship between an individual and God. Therefore, Zipporah's statement may reflect her awareness of the seriousness and pain of the act, while also expressing the intimate connection between her son and husband with God's people, a connection now also physical, as a spiritual commitment. This also shows Zipporah's respect and deep understanding of the covenant, even though she was not an Israelite and had to face cultural and religious challenges in marrying Moses. Her statement could be seen as a manifestation of spiritual struggle, as she recognized her important role in maintaining and fulfilling the covenant that God had established, even though it was a painful and challenging act. In Joshua 5:2-3, it is written, "At that time the Lord said to Joshua, 'Make flint knives and circumcise the Israelites again.' So Joshua made flint knives and circumcised the Israelites at Gibeath Haraloth." The reference to Joshua using flint knives to perform circumcision highlights the significance of this ritual and its connection to purification under the covenant. Zipporah's act with the flint knife also ties into the broader biblical theme of circumcision as a sign of dedication and obedience to God. The meaning behind Zipporah's intervention also raises questions about the dynamics in her marriage to Moses. As a Midianite, Zipporah was not born into the covenant community of Israel, but her actions demonstrate a deep understanding of the covenant's requirements. This event highlights the tension between their cultural backgrounds and emphasizes the importance of the covenant in their relationship. It also suggests that Zipporah might have had a deeper spiritual understanding, which Moses, focused on his mission, may have overlooked. In Deuteronomy 10:16, it is written, "Circumcise your hearts, therefore, and do not be stiff-necked any longer." This verse, although referring to circumcision of the heart in a figurative sense, evokes a profound theme related to the physical act of circumcision, a sign of commitment and loyalty to God. Zipporah's strong and decisive action in performing circumcision on her son was not just a simple ritual, but a profound symbol of her inner understanding of the covenant that God had made with his people. Zipporah's act can be seen as a true and strong spiritual commitment to God, a commitment that went beyond external rituals to an adherence to the deeper sacred requirements that God had set forth. She performed a ritual which symbolized a profound awareness of living according to God's covenant, an understanding that went beyond mere religious formalities. This act of Zipporah shows that she had a deep and direct connection with God, understanding that the covenant was about following rules, or in other words, it is a spiritual connection, obedience, and loyalty to the Creator. In that moment, Zipporah demonstrated her willingness to engage in a relationship with God, conveyed through outward rituals and deep respect and commitment in her heart. She went beyond the surface to truly live in the covenant, and that act reflected a real spiritual change, an alteration that we, in our own faith lives, must also seek. This circumcision moment is a key moment in Zipporah's story, showcasing her timely and decisive intervention in a critical situation, which highlights her role in Moses' covenant relationship with God. In the story of Moses and Zipporah, her actions not only saved Moses' life, but also affirmed the importance of the covenant between God and his people. Zipporah's actions show that she was a strong character with profound spiritual insight, capable of navigating cultural and religious differences in her marriage to Moses. Though this event was brief, it offers much to reflect on concerning themes such as the covenant, obedience, and the role of women in the larger story of God's people. Now we will explore Zipporah's return to Midian as Moses prepares to lead the Israelites out of Egypt. The Bible briefly but meaningfully mentions Zipporah and her children returning to Midian. This is recorded in Exodus 18, when Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, brought her and her children back to Moses. Exodus 18:2-3 states, "After Moses had sent his wife Zipporah away, his father-in-law Jethro received her and her 2 sons. One son was named Gershom, for Moses said, 'I have become an alien in a foreign land.' And the other son was named Eleazar, for he said, 'The God of my father was my help and delivered me from the sword of Pharaoh.'" This passage shows that at one point during the preparations for the Exodus, Moses had sent Zipporah and her 2 sons, Gershom and Eleazar, back to her father's house in Midian. The reason for this decision is not explicitly stated in the text, but several possibilities can be considered. Moses sending Zipporah and the children to Midian could be understood as a strategic decision to protect his family. The mission God gave Moses to confront Pharaoh and demand the release of the Israelites was an incredibly dangerous task. As Moses prepared to face one of the most powerful kings in the ancient world, he surely understood that the safety of his family was an important factor that could not be overlooked. Although God had declared that those who sought Moses' life were dead, Exodus 4:19, the danger was not entirely gone. Moses' return to Egypt still posed many risks, especially as he would face Pharaoh's wrath and the plagues God would bring upon Egypt. Therefore, the decision to send Zipporah and the children to Midian was a reasonable step, allowing Moses to focus entirely on the mission God had entrusted him with, without worrying about the safety of his family. In addition to safety, Zipporah's return to Midian also raises the question of the cultural challenges she faced. As a Midianite, Zipporah was not a native member of the Israelite community. When she married Moses, she entered a completely new world with different customs, traditions, and beliefs. Her life among a community with a different culture and faith was certainly not easy. Being the wife of a leader chosen by God to lead the Israelites out of Egypt may have caused Zipporah to feel isolated and estranged. This difference may have led to feelings of discrimination, especially when Miriam and Aaron criticized Moses for marrying a Cushite woman, Numbers 12:1. Therefore, Zipporah's return to Midian may have been a decision to find safety and a sense of belonging that she might not have found within the Israelite community. Returning to her father's house was a way for her to feel protected and comforted while Moses continued the important work God had given him. Moses' decision to send Zipporah and the children to Midian was not merely an act of protecting their safety, but also reflected the tensions within his family. Moses was the leader chosen by God to lead the Israelites out of slavery, bearing the responsibility of guiding a nation in a crucial mission. This responsibility came with many heavy demands, preventing Moses from fully dedicating time to his family. Leading a nation, facing the challenges and dangers from Pharaoh, required Moses to place the mission above all else, including family unity in the short term. In Exodus 4:20, it is written, "So Moses took his wife and sons, put them on a donkey, and returned to Egypt. He took the staff of God in his hand." Although Moses initially decided to bring Zipporah and the children with him on the journey back to Egypt, his later decision to send them back to Midian suggests that the events to come in Egypt, particularly the plagues and the confrontation with Pharaoh, might make it inconvenient and dangerous for his family to accompany him. This decision reflects Moses' sacrifice, as he had to choose between his grand mission and his family. After some time apart, in Exodus 18, we see that Jethro brought Zipporah and the children back to reunite with Moses after the Israelites had successfully left Egypt. This reunion was significant for Moses and his family, marking an important milestone in the grand narrative of Israel's deliverance. Exodus 18:5-7 says, "Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, together with his sons and wife, came to him in the wilderness, where he was camped near the mountain of God. Jethro had sent word to him, 'I, your father-in-law Jethro, am coming to you with your wife and her 2 sons.' So Moses went out to meet his father-in-law, bowed down, and kissed him." This encounter was marked by respect and affection, as Moses personally went out to meet Jethro, bowing down and kissing him as an act of honor. The return of Zipporah and the children marked a restoration of family relationships after a long period of separation. At the same time, this reunion also emphasizes the importance of family and kinship in the larger story of the covenant that God established with Israel. This reconciliation was not merely a personal moment for Moses' family, but also a symbol of restoration and the strong connection between generations in God's redemptive plan. Now we will continue to explore the encounter with Miriam and Aaron, Zipporah's final significant appearance in the Bible. This event occurred in the context of a conflict between Miriam and Aaron, Moses' siblings. This incident, recorded in the book of Numbers, sheds light on tensions within Moses' family and provides insight into broader cultural and ethnic dynamics. Numbers 12:1 says, "Miriam and Aaron began to talk against Moses because of his Cushite wife, for he had married a Cushite." This is the only direct reference to this conflict, but it carries significant meaning. The term Cushite typically refers to someone from the region of Kush, which is associated with modern-day Sudan or Ethiopia, indicating African descent. Scholars have debated whether the Cushite wife refers to Zipporah or another woman Moses may have married. If the Cushite wife indeed refers to Zipporah, it suggests her foreign status and possibly even her appearance may have become points of contention within Moses' family. The mention of Moses' wife as a Cushite highlights the cultural and ethnic tension she may have faced within the Israelite community. Zipporah was already an outsider, being a Midianite, and calling her a Cushite may emphasize her foreignness in the eyes of Miriam and Aaron. Deuteronomy 7:3-4 says, "Do not intermarry with them. Do not give your daughters to their sons, or take their daughters for your sons, for they will turn your children away from following me to serve other gods, and the Lord's anger will burn against you and quickly destroy you." Although this command was issued later, it reflects the common concern among the Israelites about marrying foreign nations. These marriages were often feared to lead to idol worship and abandoning the covenant with God. Miriam and Aaron's criticism may have stemmed from a deep fear of cultural and religious contamination, which often accompanied interracial marriages in that time. In addition to the cultural and racial tensions, this event may also reflect jealousy and power dynamics within the leadership of Israel. Miriam and Aaron were both prominent figures in the community, with Miriam being a prophetess and Aaron the high priest. Their criticism of Moses could have been due to jealousy over Moses' special relationship with God and his leadership position. Numbers 12:2 says, "Has the Lord spoken only through Moses?" they asked. "Hasn't he also spoken through us?" And the Lord heard this. This passage shows that the issue was not just about Moses' marriage, but also about their perception of inequality in God's communication with them. Miriam and Aaron felt overlooked, questioning why Moses had such a direct connection with God. Their criticism of Moses' wife may have been an attempt to undermine his authority, using her foreign identity as an attack point. God's response to this incident was swift and severe. He called Moses, Aaron, and Miriam to the tent of meeting, where he defended Moses and rebuked Miriam and Aaron for speaking against him. Numbers 12:6-8 says, "The Lord said, 'Listen to my words. When there is a prophet among you, I, the Lord, reveal myself to them in visions. I speak to them in dreams. But this is not true of my servant Moses. He is faithful in all my house. With him I speak face to face, clearly and not in riddles. He sees the form of the Lord. Why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses?'" God's defense of Moses highlights the unique relationship he had with Moses, a relationship unlike that with any other prophet or leader. God's anger rose against Miriam and Aaron, but Miriam bore the heavier consequence. Numbers 12:10 records, "When the cloud lifted from above the tent, Miriam's skin was leprous. It became as white as snow. Aaron turned toward her and saw that she had a defiling skin disease." Miriam's leprosy was a disease that made her ceremonially and socially unclean. Her being stricken with leprosy and isolated from the community could be seen as a symbolic punishment. It reflected the consequences of her attempt to exclude and belittle Moses' wife simply because of her foreign identity. Ironically, the punishment of leprosy, which turned her skin as white as snow, could be seen as God's rebuke against Miriam's criticism of a woman who may have had dark skin. Miriam's leprosy and Aaron's subsequent plea for her healing reflect a moment of repentance and reconciliation. Moses, with humility and compassion, pleaded with God for his sister. Numbers 12:13-15 says, "So Moses cried out to the Lord, 'Please God, heal her.' The Lord replied to Moses, 'If her father had spit in her face, would she not have been in disgrace for 7 days? Confine her outside the camp for 7 days. After that, she can be brought back.' So Miriam was confined outside the camp for 7 days, and the people did not move on until she was brought back. Miriam's 7-day isolation outside the camp served as a time of purification and reflection. It also highlights the seriousness with which God views the sin of jealousy, racism, and rebellion against his chosen leader. After 7 days, Miriam was restored to the community, but this event was not just a moment of physical healing. It was a powerful lesson about the dangers of letting cultural and racial prejudices influence relationships within the community of God's people. This serves as a reminder that racial discrimination or cultural differences can easily create division and affect unity within the community of believers. Miriam's affliction with leprosy and her subsequent restoration also emphasizes God's severity toward discriminatory actions, while showing that only humility and repentance can restore our relationship with God and with one another. The encounter between Miriam and Aaron also sheds light on the complexities surrounding Zipporah's role, Moses' wife. While in Numbers 12 verse 1, the Cushite wife could directly refer to Zipporah or another woman Moses might have married, this event highlights the cultural and racial tensions Zipporah may have faced as the wife of one of the most important leaders in Israel. Cultural and racial differences may have made it difficult for her to be accepted and integrated into the Israelite community, a people with a completely different cultural and religious foundation. This event also underscores the challenges Moses faced, not only in leading a nation, but also in managing family dynamics, particularly those influenced by issues of race, culture, and jealousy. Moses had to lead Israel out of slavery while also dealing with internal tensions within his family, where prejudices and discrimination could affect his relationships with loved ones. These challenges clearly reflect that setting an example for the nation is a leadership task that requires skill in maintaining family harmony and facing cultural and social trials. This serves as a reminder of the importance of humility, unity, and God's fair judgment in the community of believers. In conclusion, Zipporah's story, though brief, is filled with mystery and meaning. As Moses' first wife, she played a crucial role in his life, from their initial meeting in Midian to the pivotal moment when she saved his life. Her story reminds us of the complexities of cultural and spiritual differences and the strength needed to overcome them. Although the Bible does not give us many details about Zipporah, what we do know shows that she was a courageous and capable woman who supported one of the greatest leaders in the Bible. So we have now explored the mysterious story of Zipporah, Moses' first wife. She is a little-mentioned figure in the Bible, but an indispensable part of the great mission that God entrusted to Moses. From their chance encounter in Midian to the tense moments when she saved Moses' life, Zipporah's story will surely make you reflect on her challenges and courage. What makes Zipporah such a strong woman? And why, as a foreigner, did she play such an important role in God's plan for Israel? What do you think about the decisions she made throughout her life, from protecting her family to remaining loyal to God? If you find Zipporah's story inspiring and worth exploring further, don't forget to hit like, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with friends who are eager to learn more about the Bible. And be sure to leave your thoughts and questions in the comments. We're always excited to hear from you. Thank you for joining us on this journey. May God bless you.
The Israel-Palestine conflict is about the very heart of three major world religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. At the center of it all lies Jerusalem, a city so sacred that it's been called the epicenter of God's divine plan. But why is this land so coveted? Why do so many continue to fight over it? And what does the Bible reveal about this ancient battle? In today's video, we dive deep into this historic conflict and unravel the layers of biblical prophecy, historical roots, and the current realities surrounding Israel and Palestine. Stay tuned as we reveal the spiritual and prophetic significance behind the conflict and why its resolution, or lack thereof, matters to believers across the globe. Is this more than just a territorial dispute? Could it be part of God's grand plan for the end times? Let's explore. The roots of the Israel-Palestine conflict can be traced back to the Bible, specifically to the book of Genesis. The land in question is what the Bible describes as Canaan, later known as Israel. According to Genesis 12:1-3, God made a covenant with Abraham, promising him and his descendants the land of Canaan. The Lord had said to Abram, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation. and to your descendants I will give this land." For Jews, this covenant is the foundation of their claim to the land. Abraham's descendants, through his son Isaac and grandson Jacob, Israel, became the Israelites, who would later form the Kingdom of Israel with Jerusalem as its capital. But the story doesn't end there. Abraham's other son, Ishmael, is considered the ancestor of the Arab peoples, including many Palestinians. While Isaac's descendants became the Israelites, Ishmael's descendants spread throughout the Middle East, eventually embracing Islam centuries later. In Islam, Ibrahim, and his son Ishmael hold significant religious importance, and the Quran speaks of their journey and role in building the Kaaba in Mecca. This connection gives Muslims a strong spiritual link to Abraham, and by extension to the land that was promised to him. As a result, both Jews and Palestinians, many of whom are Muslim, claim Abrahamic lineage, providing both sides with a religious and historical connection to the land. For Christians, this land holds equal significance. Jesus Christ was born, preached, died, and rose again in Israel, making it the heart of Christianity. But is this divine promise enough to settle the conflict? Deep Bible Stories viewers, let us know what you think in the comments below. Long before the modern-day conflict, the land of Israel was inhabited by Canaanites. The Canaanites were a group of ancient peoples who lived in the Levant, modern-day Israel, Palestine, Lebanon, and Syria, long before Abraham arrived. The book of Joshua describes how the Israelites, after being freed from Egypt under Moses, conquered Canaan and established the kingdom of Israel. Another ancient people associated with the region were the Philistines. The Philistines, after whom Palestine is named, were a seafaring people who settled along the Mediterranean coast, primarily in what is today known as the Gaza Strip. They frequently clashed with the Israelites, as described in numerous biblical accounts. One of the most famous stories is that of David and Goliath, where the future King David defeated the giant Philistine warrior. By the time of the Babylonians and Assyrians, the Philistines had largely been assimilated into other cultures or destroyed, disappearing from history. The Palestinians of today are not directly descended from the Philistines, although they have adopted the name. Instead, Palestinians are largely Arab in origin, with ties to Arabia, Syria, and Jordan. But their connection to the land is deep and long-standing, with many Palestinians tracing their roots in the region back centuries. It's fascinating to see how much weight historical narratives carry in this conflict. The Israelites, with their biblical covenant, and the Palestinians, with their historical ties to the land, both feel an intrinsic right to Canaan, now known as Israel, Palestine. This historical context lays the groundwork for the centuries-long struggle over who truly belongs in this land. But it's not just history. Faith, tradition, and identity are at the heart of this dispute. The term Palestine can be traced back to Roman times. In 70 AD, after the destruction of the Second Temple in Jerusalem, the Romans sought to erase the Jewish presence in the region. The Emperor Hadrian renamed Judea as Syria Palestina, deliberately invoking the name of the Israelites' ancient enemies, the Philistines, to sever the Jewish connection to the land. For the next several centuries, the land known as Palestine would pass through many hands: the Byzantines, Islamic caliphates, and eventually the Ottoman Empire. Each ruler left their mark, but through it all, both Jews and Arabs lived in the region, though Jews often remained a minority. Fast forward to the 20th century, when the collapse of the Ottoman Empire after World War I led to the British mandate over Palestine. Under British control, tensions began to rise between Jewish Zionists, who sought to establish a homeland in Palestine, and Arab Palestinians, who had been living in the region for centuries. The tipping point came in 1947, where the United Nations proposed a partition plan that would create two states, one Jewish and one Arab. The Jewish leaders accepted the plan, but the Arab world rejected it. In 1948, Israel declared its independence, sparking the first Arab-Israeli war. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were displaced, marking the beginning of the Nakba, or catastrophe, a defining moment in Palestinian history. Since that time, the conflict has revolved around several key issues: land ownership, national identity, and the right of return for Palestinian refugees. The creation of Israel led to a series of wars with neighboring Arab countries, most notably in 1967, when Israel captured the West Bank, Gaza, East Jerusalem, and the Golan Heights during the Six-Day War. These territories, particularly the West Bank and East Jerusalem, remain a source of contention. While Israel claims Jerusalem as its eternal capital, Palestinians see East Jerusalem as the future capital of a Palestinian state. The city of Jerusalem is the most emotionally charged aspect of this conflict. It holds sacred significance for Jews, Christians, and Muslims. For Jews, Jerusalem is the location of the ancient temple, the center of Jewish worship and identity. The Western Wall, all that remains of the Second Temple, is Judaism's holiest site. For Muslims, Jerusalem is home to the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock, Islam's third holiest site. According to Islamic tradition, the Prophet Muhammad ascended to heaven from this site during his night journey. For Christians, Jerusalem is where Jesus Christ was crucified, buried, and resurrected, making it the spiritual heart of Christianity. Jerusalem, therefore, is not just a political issue but a spiritual battleground, with each faith claiming a deep connection to the city. While Israel currently controls the entire city, Palestinians seek East Jerusalem as their capital. This divide has made peace negotiations incredibly difficult, as neither side is willing to relinquish their claim to this holy city. Deep Bible stories. Viewers, what do you think about this? Can there be a compromise over Jerusalem, or is it truly an immovable object in this conflict? Today, the conflict remains at a stalemate. Israel controls the West Bank and has blockaded Gaza, citing security concerns due to ongoing rocket attacks from Hamas. Meanwhile, Palestinians in these areas live under occupation with limited freedom of movement, high unemployment, and often a lack of basic services. In Gaza, the situation is dire. Controlled by Hamas, the region faces frequent clashes with Israel. The West Bank is governed by the Palestinian Authority, but the constant presence of Israeli settlements and military checkpoints makes everyday life a struggle for the Palestinian people. The question of Palestinian statehood remains unresolved. While Israel is recognized internationally, Palestine is recognized by many countries but lacks full sovereignty due to the ongoing conflict. As Christians, what can we learn from this? The Bible has much to say about Israel and the surrounding nations. Many Christians believe that the Israel-Palestine conflict has prophetic significance. Jerusalem in particular is seen as a key to end-times prophecy. Zechariah 12:3 warns, "On that day when all the nations of the earth are gathered against her, I will make Jerusalem an immovable rock for all the nations." For many theologians, this conflict is viewed as a precursor to the second coming of Christ. According to some interpretations of biblical prophecy, the struggle over Jerusalem will continue until the return of Jesus, who will bring peace and establish God's kingdom. But what does this mean for us today? As followers of Christ, we are called to be peacemakers. Jesus said, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God." Matthew 5:9. We must pray for both Israelis and Palestinians and seek ways to promote justice, peace, and reconciliation in this troubled region. The Israel-Palestine conflict is one of the most deeply entrenched and emotionally charged disputes in the world. It is a battle over land, identity, and faith. But as Christians, we must strive to understand both sides, recognizing the historical and spiritual significance of this land. Jesus Christ is the ultimate Prince of Peace, and we must follow his example in praying for a resolution that brings lasting peace to Jerusalem and the Holy Land. King Solomon, the son of David and Bathsheba, is one of the most fascinating figures in the Bible. Known for his unmatched wisdom, his wealth, and his sprawling kingdom, Solomon's life is a mixture of glory and tragedy. He began as a man of great promise, blessed by God with wisdom beyond measure, wealth unimaginable, and power unrivaled. However, despite all these gifts, Solomon's story takes a dark turn, marked by excess, idolatry, and spiritual downfall. This leads to one of the most tragic questions in the Bible. How did the wisest man in history fall so low? In this journey we will uncover the rise and fall of King Solomon. We'll explore how he became wealthy, the consequences of his 1,000 wives and concubines, and most importantly, how his descent into sin offers a sobering lesson for all of us today. Solomon's story is one of both divine blessing and human frailty, showing us that even the wisest among us are vulnerable to the temptations of the world. Solomon's story begins with a prayer, a humble request for wisdom. Upon becoming king after the death of his father David, Solomon sought God's guidance. In a dream, God appeared to Solomon, offering him anything he desired. Instead of asking for wealth, long life, or the death of his enemies, Solomon asked for wisdom to govern his people. This selfless request pleased God, and as recorded in 1 Kings 3:12-13, God responded, "I will give you a wise and discerning heart, so that there will never have been anyone like you, nor will there ever be. Moreover, I will give you what you have not asked for, both wealth and honor, so that in your lifetime you will have no equal among kings." With this blessing, Solomon's reign began in a manner unlike any other. His wisdom became legendary. People from far and wide, including the Queen of Sheba, came to hear his insights, marvel at his judgments, and see the grandeur of his kingdom. 1 Kings 4:29-30 says, God gave Solomon wisdom and very great insight, and a breadth of understanding as measureless as the sand on the seashore. Solomon's wisdom was greater than the wisdom of all the people of the East, and greater than all the wisdom of Egypt. Solomon's wisdom was just the beginning of his great success. He also became immensely wealthy, amassing vast riches during his reign. How did Solomon build such incredible wealth? The Bible describes multiple avenues through which he accumulated his fortune. Trade and commerce. Solomon capitalized on his kingdom's prime location. Israel was situated at the crossroads of major trade routes between Egypt, Arabia, and Mesopotamia. Solomon established lucrative trade agreements, importing valuable goods such as gold, silver, horses, and spices. 1 Kings 10:22 mentions that Solomon's fleet of trading ships brought back gold, silver, ivory, apes, and peacocks every 3 years, demonstrating his immense wealth and international reach. Tributes from other nations. Solomon's wisdom and power brought him honor from other nations. Kings and rulers paid tribute to him, and they sought his favor by giving him gifts of wealth. In 1 Kings 10:25 it says, Year after year everyone who came brought a gift, articles of silver and gold, robes, weapons and spices and horses and mules. Heavy taxation. Solomon also taxed his people heavily to fund his ambitious building projects, most notably the Temple of God in Jerusalem, which took 7 years to build, 1 Kings 6:38. He even constructed a lavish palace for himself which took 13 years, 1 Kings 7:1. These massive undertakings required substantial funding, and while they contributed to his glory, they also placed a heavy burden on the people. Gold from Ophir. One of the most mysterious and significant sources of Solomon's wealth was the gold from Ophir. According to 1 Kings 9:28, Solomon's ships brought back 420 talents of gold from Ophir, roughly 16 tons. Ophir's exact location remains a mystery, but its gold added greatly to Solomon's immense riches. Solomon's wealth was unparalleled in the ancient world. 1 Kings 10:14-23 provides an extraordinary description of his riches, stating that Solomon's annual income was 666 talents of gold, more than 25 tons, and silver was considered as common as stones in Jerusalem. His throne was made of ivory and overlaid with gold, and all his drinking vessels were made of pure gold. However, as his wealth grew, so did Solomon's appetites, not just for material things, but for power and pleasure. This is where the seeds of his downfall were sown. One of the most troubling aspects of Solomon's reign was his extravagant harem. 1 Kings 11:3 reveals that Solomon had 700 wives of royal birth and 300 concubines. Many of these marriages were political alliances, aimed at securing peace and favorable relations with neighboring nations. But these foreign wives came with their own customs, religions, and idols. Solomon's marriages were a direct violation of God's commandment in Deuteronomy 17:17, which instructed kings not to multiply wives, lest their hearts be led astray. Unfortunately, this is exactly what happened to Solomon. His foreign wives brought their idols into Israel, and over time they turned Solomon's heart away from the God of Israel. 1 Kings 11:4-5 gives a devastating account. As Solomon grew old, his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not fully devoted to the Lord his God, as the heart of David his father had been. He followed Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and Molech, the detestable god of the Ammonites. The allure of idolatry. Solomon's wives introduced him to the worship of foreign deities such as Ashtoreth, a fertility goddess, and Molech, a god associated with child sacrifice. In his later years, Solomon built altars and shrines for these idols, even allowing his wives to practice these detestable rituals in Israel. This was a complete betrayal of God, who had warned his people not to worship other gods or adopt the practices of foreign nations. Solomon's heart, which had once been so fully devoted to the Lord, became divided. The man who had built the temple of God, a place for the worship of Yahweh alone, now allowed false gods to coexist within Israel's borders. The implications of this were disastrous for the nation. Solomon's idolatry set the stage for the spiritual decline of Israel, leading to the eventual division of the kingdom after his death. How could someone as wise as Solomon, who had been blessed directly by God, fall into such deep sin? The answer lies in the nature of temptation and the human heart: pride and arrogance. As Solomon's power, wealth, and wisdom grew, so did his pride. Over time, Solomon began to rely more on his own understanding and achievements than on God. In Proverbs 16:18, Solomon himself writes, "Pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall." Ironically, the man who penned these words fell victim to the very thing he warned against. Solomon's success made him believe he was above God's law, leading him to make alliances and compromises that would ultimately lead to his downfall. The allure of worldly pleasure. Solomon's love for pleasure, women, and wealth became an overwhelming force in his life. In the book of Ecclesiastes, which many believe Solomon wrote in his later years, he reflects on his pursuit of pleasure, calling it meaningless. Ecclesiastes 2:10-11 says, "I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. My heart took delight in all my labor, and this was the reward for all my toil. Yet when I surveyed all that my hands had done and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained under the sun." Solomon recognized that all the wealth, women, and power he had accumulated brought him no lasting fulfillment. Yet by then, the damage had already been done. Spiritual compromise. The influence of Solomon's foreign wives and their idolatrous practices gradually eroded his spiritual integrity. The Bible warns against being unequally yoked with unbelievers, and Solomon's story is a prime example of why. His compromises in marriage led to spiritual compromise, and his once strong faith in God was weakened over time. Solomon's heart became divided, and as a result, he turned away from the God who had given him everything. Disobedience to God's command. Solomon's downfall also came from his failure to obey the specific instructions given to him by God. As mentioned earlier, God had clearly commanded the kings of Israel not to amass excessive wealth, horses or wives. Deuteronomy 17:16, 17. Solomon disobeyed all of these commands, believing that his wisdom and power would protect him from the consequences. But disobedience to God's word always leads to destruction, no matter how wise or powerful one may be. Solomon's life serves as a powerful cautionary tale. It shows us that even the greatest blessings, wisdom, wealth and power, can become stumbling blocks if we lose sight of God's commands. Solomon's fall teaches us several critical lessons. No one is immune to temptation. Solomon had more wisdom than any person in history, yet he still fell prey to sin. His story reminds us that no one is beyond the reach of temptation. 1 Corinthians 10:12 warns, "So if you think you are standing firm, be careful that you don't fall. We must remain vigilant in our faith, no matter how spiritually strong we believe ourselves to be." The dangers of compromise. Solomon's downfall began with small compromises, alliances with foreign nations, marriages to foreign women, and the acceptance of their idols. These compromises accumulated over time until Solomon was fully ensnared by sin. In our own lives, small compromises may seem harmless, but they can lead to larger spiritual failures if left unchecked. The pursuit of worldly pleasures is empty. Despite having everything the world could offer, riches, power, and pleasure, Solomon realized that these things were ultimately meaningless. His reflections in Ecclesiastes remind us that true fulfillment can only be found in God. Chasing after wealth, pleasure, or success apart from Him will leave us empty. Obedience to God is essential. Solomon's story shows us that wisdom and blessings mean nothing without obedience to God's commands. Deuteronomy 10:12 reminds us of what God requires. "And now, Israel, what does the Lord your God ask of you, but to fear the Lord your God, to walk in obedience to Him, to love Him, to serve the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul." Solomon's disobedience brought his kingdom to ruin, and it serves as a sobering reminder that we must prioritize obedience to God in all things. Solomon's reign, though marked by great achievements, ended in tragedy. His idolatry and disobedience led to the division of the kingdom after his death. God, in his anger, declared that the kingdom would be torn from Solomon's son, Rehoboam, leaving only one tribe, Judah, under his rule. 1 Kings 11:11-13. The once united Israel would be fractured, and the consequences of Solomon's sins would be felt for generations. Yet, despite his failings, Solomon's story does not end in despair. The wisdom literature attributed to him, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Solomon, remains a testament to his early devotion to God. Ecclesiastes in particular is a book of deep reflection, where Solomon grapples with the meaning of life and concludes with this powerful exhortation. "Fear God and keep His commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind." Ecclesiastes 12:13. Even after all his failures, Solomon recognized that the only thing that truly matters is obedience to God. The story of King Solomon is a mixture of brilliance and tragedy. He began his reign as the wisest and wealthiest king in history, blessed by God and revered by nations. But his fall from grace shows that wisdom and wealth are not enough to sustain a person's relationship with God. Solomon's heart was led astray by pride, pleasure, and compromise, leading him into idolatry and spiritual ruin. For us today, Solomon's life serves as both an inspiration and a warning. It reminds us that no one is immune to temptation, no matter how wise or blessed they may be. It teaches us the dangers of spiritual compromise and the emptiness of pursuing worldly pleasures. Most importantly, it calls us to live in obedience to God's commandments, recognizing that true wisdom lieth not in our own understanding, but in humble submission to God's will. If this story has caused you to reflect on your own life, take a moment to examine your heart. Are there areas where you have compromised? Have you been chasing after the things of the world instead of pursuing God? Solomon's story is a reminder that it's never too late to turn back to God. Subscribe for more powerful biblical insights and share this story with friends and family, so they too can learn from the rise and fall of the wisest king in history. Stay blessed, and may God guide you in all wisdom and obedience.
Brace yourself for a radical claim that defies everything conventional society has drilled into your mind. People talk about a hidden segment of our population, individuals who appear fully human but lack genuine consciousness, real self-awareness, or any spark of spirit. They're often labeled non-player characters, backdrop people, or even soulless. Throughout history, these accounts have lurked in obscure manuscripts, esoteric texts, and clandestine circles, dismissed as paranoid speculation or outright heresy. Yet the deeper you dive into this bizarre narrative, the more unsettling it becomes. Some ancient writers, secretive mystical orders, and cutting-edge theorists all converge on a single explosive idea: maybe not everyone around us is truly awake. In certain Gnostic writings, fragments discovered among the Nag Hammadi scriptures, there's a jarring hint of categories within humanity: those imbued with divine spirit, those partially aware, and those who remain locked in pure material existence. Instead of calling them soulless, these texts describe them as being stripped of the higher spark, bound to the physical realm with no real capacity for spiritual enlightenment. Scholars argue about whether the Gnostics were literal or symbolic, but a handful of researchers interpret these references as proof that a sizable number of people are simply fillers in our shared reality. Evidence isn't confined to ancient theology. Hermetic treatises, likewise, propose that certain individuals possess only the lowest rung of consciousness, missing the crucial ingredient that grants true self-awareness. And in Kabbalistic thought, the idea of a divine soul is considered a privilege not automatically granted to every entity walking the earth. Again, mainstream discussions tend to gloss over these details, preferring a neat narrative that everyone is equal in spiritual potential. Critics of that neat narrative point to these cryptic texts and claim they're glimpses of a truth we've collectively repressed for centuries. Modern parallels can be found in the realm of philosophy. David Chalmers's concept of philosophical zombies posits a hypothetical being that behaves exactly like a human but lacks subjective experience. While academics use it to debate the nature of consciousness, more fringe voices co-opt it to bolster the NPC hypothesis. They insist these zombies are not merely a hypothetical tool but an unspoken reality, a hidden class of people operating on autopilot without genuine interiority. This notion grates against mainstream psychology and neuroscience, but it keeps surfacing in countless forums, alternative research groups, and conspiratorial subcultures. Skeptics demand verifiable proof, yet there's a historical pattern of authority suppressing anything that threatens established order. Look at the persistent hush around certain Dead Sea Scroll fragments, the under-the-table scholarly debate on apocryphal gospels, or the centuries of conflict between mystics and orthodoxy. Some claim that revelations about soulless people got buried under official dogma, partly to maintain social harmony, partly to protect powerful institutions. Others assert that the entire NPC narrative is just a modern reinterpretation of ancient allegories meant to highlight spiritual ignorance rather than literal soullessness. Now let's crack open the dusty vault of ancient writings that rarely see the spotlight, because while mainstream sources love quoting the same handful of well-known texts, entire corridors of esoteric lore remain overlooked. Picture vast libraries containing scrolls and tablets that hint at a hidden subclass of humanity whose spirit, if it exists at all, is disturbingly hollow. Ancient Mesopotamian myths, for instance, describe the gods fashioning humans from clay, then selectively bestowing something akin to a vital essence. Most references focus on shaping mortal workers for the gods, but scattered lines in some translations allude to figures created without that full infusion of divine breath, essentially living tools rather than fully realized humans. Researchers argue whether these passages are literal or allegorical, but they keep popping up in lesser-known cuneiform fragments catalogued in archives around the world. In the labyrinth of Egyptian spirituality, we see a complex map of the soul, Ka, Ba, Ib, and so on. Standard Egyptology frames these as components that together form a complete individual. Yet certain funerary spells suggest there were those who never received the essential spark required to journey through the Duat, the realm of the dead. A handful of fringe Egyptologists point to specific lines in mortuary texts detailing empty vessels that neither pass to the afterlife nor remain as hauntings. They vanish from the cosmic cycle, absent the Ka or Ba that would anchor them in the spiritual plane. While mainstream scholars usually dismiss these references as metaphorical, alternative researchers interpret them as evidence of a recognized phenomenon, beings that look human but fundamentally lack a critical piece of consciousness. Babylonian epics also fuel the discussion. Texts from the library of Ashurbanipal, though partially damaged, contain stories about artificially created servants, sometimes described as shadows in flesh or puppets of the gods. In mainstream academic circles, these passages are often explained as mythic preludes to the creation of humankind in general. But some fringe investigators believe there's a distinction between genuine humans, endowed with independent will, and facsimiles that follow routine commands. One translation references an entire assembly that existed merely to crowd the courts of divine rulers, performing mechanical tasks without any personal drive. Kabbalistic writings add yet another twist to the narrative. While many are aware of the concept of the golem, an artificial figure brought to life through mystical rites, fewer people realize that older layers of Jewish esoteric tradition imply the possibility of humans born lacking a full connection to the nefesh, the life force, rosh, emotional mind, or neshama, the highest spiritual soul. Some texts suggest these individuals might remain locked in a lower state, never ascending to deeper levels of awareness. Scholars within Hasidic and other mystical streams typically interpret these gradations as stages of spiritual development, not as absolute categories of soulless versus ensouled. However, certain Kabbalistic commentaries do hint at a permanent deficiency for some, raising the question of whether everyone truly carries a complete spark of the divine, or whether some are living placeholders. Little-known early Christian apocrypha add more fuel to the fire. Texts that never made it into the official canon sometimes recount stories of Jesus or the apostles encountering crowds of people who remain oblivious to divine truths, not just out of stubbornness, but because they have no internal capacity for faith. A few tantalizing lines from the infancy Gospels, for example, describe empty hearts that cannot house the Spirit, an image overshadowed by the grander miracles typically highlighted in theological debates. Modern analysts who delve into these obscure passages claim they're talking about literal voids, a condition akin to being physically alive but spiritually inert. Greek and Roman mystery cults leave fragments too. The Orphic tradition famously discusses the transmigration of souls, yet there's mention of those who never truly possessed a soul to begin with. It's murky, hidden behind layers of cryptic hymns and allegories. Devotees had to undergo initiations, sometimes reenacting mythical journeys from death to rebirth. If you dig into certain Orphic hymns, you'll find passages about beings who walk among men yet remain excluded from the cycle of rebirth because there's nothing to recycle. These lines rarely make it into mainstream classics courses, but they resonate with the idea of an empty shell moving through life, ignorant of any higher calling. Similar references surface in the Persian Zoroastrian tradition, though typically overshadowed by the main dualistic struggle between Ahura Mazda and Angra Mainyu. Some lesser-studied Zand or Pahlavi texts allude to a category of individuals who serve the lie by default, not because they've chosen evil, but because they lack the moral and spiritual essence to align with truth. Again, translators often consider this poetic flourish. Yet contemporary esoteric circles seize on these phrases, suggesting that ancient Magi recognized a segment of humanity that's simply going through the motions, playing a part without any real interior life. Picture a bustling city street full of folks heading to work. Each person seems animated, engaged, and reactive to the world around them. Yet certain theorists argue that some of them might just be philosophical zombies, individuals indistinguishable from regular humans on the outside but lacking genuine inner experience. This notion became an academic lightning rod when analytic philosophers started asking whether it's logically possible for a being to mimic every outward sign of consciousness, language, problem-solving, even emotional expressions, without any subjective awareness behind the scenes. David Chalmers's discussions on the hard problem of consciousness ignited much of this debate. He pointed out that no matter how precisely you map a brain's physical processes, you still face an explanatory gap. Why do certain physical events produce an actual felt experience? Philosophical zombies directly confront that question. If a hypothetical creature can go through all the motions of being human without having any conscious sensation, no genuine pain when poked, no authentic joy when praised, then it reveals a gaping hole in our current understanding of how mind relates to matter. Many academic philosophers reject the possibility of zombies, labeling it an extravagant thought experiment. They lean on materialist theories, insisting that consciousness is inseparable from certain neural configurations. Others disagree, maintaining that the concept of a zombie highlights how we might never fully prove another person is conscious. In everyday life, people rely on empathy, language, and consistent behaviors to assume everyone else is lit up inside. Philosophical zombie theory tosses a wrench in that assumption, fueling speculation that a portion of the population could be going through life without ever experiencing real qualia, those raw feels that color every waking moment. Some link philosophical zombies to certain psychological phenomena where individuals display a shocking lack of interiority, possibly due to neurological anomalies or dissociative conditions. There are documented cases of patients describing states that sound eerily zombie-like, lacking personal insight or an inner monologue. Philosophical purists might protest that such clinical examples don't fully line up with the zombie scenario, but the parallels remain striking enough to raise eyebrows. Other corners of philosophy of mind add further layers to the mystery. Daniel Dennett's arguments about consciousness as a user illusion challenge the idea that there's any deep, irreducible essence behind thought. In contrast, proponents of panpsychism suggest that consciousness infuses all matter in some form, rendering the zombie concept moot. While these theories conflict, they share a fascination with the possibility that conscious awareness isn't universal, even in creatures that look like us. Neuroscience labs have chipped in, too. Research on split-brain patients, locked-in syndrome, and advanced brain imaging sometimes yields clues about how consciousness arises, or fails to. Nobody has demonstrated a zombie in a lab, but experiments revealing blindsight or illusions of will nudge us closer to understanding whether it's possible for complex behavior to unfold without genuine subjective experience. Philosophical zombies remain a mental exercise, but these oddities in neuroscience give the conversation real-world traction. Legends from across the globe contain peculiar references to beings that appear human but lack a crucial inner spark. Haitian Vodou, for instance, describes the zombie as a person resurrected or controlled through sorcery. Popular culture often dilutes the concept into a mindless corpse, but deeper Vodou traditions emphasize that certain zombies don't simply lose their free will, they're missing an essential component that once connected them to the higher realms of consciousness. Local law indicates that the baka, sorcerer, traps or removes a person's T-bon anji, one aspect of the soul, leaving the body functional yet spiritually hollow. Some anthropologists propose that these accounts are metaphors for social control or references to drug-induced compliance. Yet plenty of local practitioners maintain that a genuine process rips away an inner essence, turning the individual into a vessel deprived of higher awareness. In Celtic folklore, stories of changelings paint another unsettling image. A fairy, or other supernatural entity, allegedly swaps a human child with a substitute that appears the same but lacks a true human soul. Various folk remedies and tests supposedly expose these imposters, leading to severe outcomes for children suspected of being changelings. While modern explanations lean on developmental disorders or misunderstanding of illnesses, older texts portray changelings as animated copies that merely imitate typical human behavior. Certain Irish and Scottish tales stress that these substitutes display off-kilter reaction, can't develop normal empathy, and remain under the sway of otherworldly masters. Contemporary readings see them as cautionary tales, but the older narratives insist that a changeling is literally missing the essential spark that defines a real human child. Japanese folklore features strange entities called tsukumagami, household objects that gain a form of sentience after 100 years. Although many depict them with quirky personalities, some stories describe them as shells possessed by wandering spirits lacking a true self. In those accounts, the object moves and interacts, but shows no sign of an internal consciousness or moral compass. Similar distinctions appear in tales of yokai that mimic human forms. Certain shapeshifters like the Naprabi appear human from a distance but reveal a featureless face, hinting at the possibility of an external shell with no real essence inside. While most see these creatures as pure myth, a fraction of researchers connect them to older Shinto beliefs about animism and spiritual occupancy, suggesting that some entities manifest physically but carry no genuine human consciousness. West African and Afro-Caribbean traditions also feature spirits or jinn that occupy uninhabited vessels. Oral histories in parts of Senegal or Mali describe borrowed bodies used by wandering entities that can't reincarnate. Instead of receiving a standard birth and soul, these bodies act as placeholders until the entity finally departs. This scenario differs from straightforward possession tales, where a normal person is overtaken. Instead, the narrative implies that a body was vacant from the start, ready to be used by an external force. Some local lore compares it to having a house without a permanent resident. The structure stands intact, but there's no genuine occupant driving free will or authentic emotion. Certain Native American stories also flirt with the concept of soulless beings. A few tribes refer to blank ones or hollow men, individuals who appear normal yet exude an unsettling emptiness in communal gatherings. Tribal elders in these stories often treat them as omens or bad medicine. While some anthropologists interpret these accounts as allegories of lost identity or disconnection from tradition, old storytellers suggest a literal absence of the spiritual essence required to share in communal rites. Blank one might speak and move like everyone else, but it doesn't form the genuine bond of spirit that unites the tribe. Several modern researchers catalog these tales to highlight shared motifs: the removal or absence of a core soul, a body that functions but lacks the internal flame, or an external force animating something otherwise dormant. The question arises whether each culture independently invented a similar metaphor or if they're describing a phenomenon that different societies interpreted through their own spiritual frameworks. Listen up, because this next angle cranks the intensity to a whole new level. There's a theory floating around that everything you see, your house, your job, the sky, and even the people you chat with, could be part of a massive programmed environment. We're talking about simulation theory, the brainchild of thinkers who argue our entire reality might be an advanced simulation engineered by a hyper-intelligent civilization. Under this paradigm, the notion of backdrop people, or NPCs, becomes more than just a side note. It fits right into a scenario where not everyone you interact with is a fully conscious participant. Some could be sophisticated background code, designed to fill out the environment much like computer-controlled characters in your favorite video game. Much of the hype around simulation theory stems from a famous thought experiment. If civilizations continue advancing technologically, it's plausible they'll develop simulations so intricate that the simulated entities believe they're in a real, organic world. Proponents say the odds are ridiculously high that we're already in one. Here's the kicker: if that's the case, not every character needs to be rendered with the same level of detail. Just like in a game, certain characters have high-resolution features when the player interacts with them, while others remain in a simplified form until they're needed. Extrapolate that idea, and you got a blueprint for how backdrop peoples might function within a simulated reality, perfectly lifelike on the surface, but lacking any real consciousness because the code doesn't demand it. Glitches in the system often come up in these conversations. You've probably heard stories: someone observes a bird frozen mid-flight, or sees two identical strangers with matching outfits and mannerisms standing right next to each other, oblivious. Online forums brim with photos and videos where reality seems to momentarily falter. Most of these get dismissed as hoaxes or camera errors, but simulation theory enthusiasts see them as cracks in the facade. They argue that real conscious players notice these anomalies, while NPCs remain untroubled, carrying on their routine as if nothing happened. It's reminiscent of a video game crowd. They look busy at first glance, but pay closer attention and you notice they loop the same limited actions or dialogues. Another phenomenon linked to this conversation is the Mandela effect, where large groups of people remember an event or detail differently than how it's documented today. Some say it's just the malleability of human memory, but others see it as evidence of software updates to the simulation backdrop. People adapt seamlessly, while a handful of conscious observers recall the previous version. This concept gets amplified by modern-day speculation about quantum computing and parallel realities. Some fans of the simulation idea argue that these odd memory discrepancies hint that we might be witnessing system-wide changes in real time. Then there's the question of how advanced a civilization needs to be to run a simulation of this scale. Advocates of the theory point out that our own technology is racing forward. Virtual reality, artificial intelligence, and procedural generation are just scratching the surface. If our future selves or some alien intelligence created these simulations, they could orchestrate entire digital universes with billions of simulated individuals, only a fraction of whom would need authentic consciousness. Backdrop people become resource-saving measures. They fill the environment with realistic behavior, never requiring the complexity or processing power that conscious minds would demand. Critics balk, insisting this all sounds like a sci-fi fever dream. Yet the simulation concept has been championed by certain high-profile tech and science influencers, fueling public fascination. When you combine the speculation around advanced computing power with the idea that not everyone we see is truly so awake, you get a potent blend of suspicion and wonder. The theory resonates with those who sense something off about daily life, who feel that certain individuals seem a bit too mechanical, unperturbed, and caught in repetitive cycles. Eastern spiritual traditions contribute a whole different flavor to the idea that not every human being is endowed with the same level, or even the same kind, of conscious essence. Rather than framing it as a question of soul versus soulless, many Eastern teachings describe layers or gradations of awareness, implying that some individuals barely register beyond the material plane. In certain branches of Hindu philosophy, there's a focus on the interplay between Purusha, pure consciousness, and Prakriti, material nature. While general interpretations insist every human has an Atman, the eternal soul, minority commentary suggests that some beings never attain a realization of this inner self, effectively functioning on autopilot within Prakriti. They might follow rituals, social norms, and biological imperatives without accessing the deeper layers of consciousness. Those who champion radical readings of these texts argue that it points to the possibility that a fraction of humanity remains locked in a purely mechanistic state, no genuine connection to the higher self. Buddhist thought complicates the picture further by teaching anatta, no permanent self. Mainstream Buddhist practice emphasizes that what we call a self is an illusion arising from fluctuating aggregates, form, sensation, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. Yet there are meditative traditions within certain sects that highlight variations in how these aggregates manifest from one person to another. A few monastic accounts speculate that while most individuals possess a dynamic interplay of these aggregates, a smaller subset may operate with severely diminished awareness, lacking the capacity for genuine insight. Though most Buddhist teachers would explain this as a temporary condition tied to karma or ignorance, some fringe interpreters claim it's permanent for certain shell personalities, who never truly experience any form of enlightenment or even the potential for it. Taoist teachings introduce the concepts of Shen, spirit, Jing, essence, and Qi, energy. Standard Taoist practices aim to balance these three treasures, believing that a disharmony can lead to spiritual dullness or emptiness. Yet older texts, especially in certain alchemical traditions, sometimes speak of individuals with incomplete or fragmented Shen, resulting in a life lived at surface level, with minimal genuine vitality or spiritual awareness. It's not labeled as soullessness in the Western sense, but the end effect can appear alarmingly similar: a person who goes through motions, eats, sleeps, and interacts, yet fails to display the spark that comes from integrating mind, body, and spirit. Some esoteric lines of Taoism go so far as to suggest that these incomplete souls can be manipulated by external forces, be they malevolent spirits or cunning masters versed in advanced energy work. In Chinese folk belief, the concept of Hun and Po also adds an intriguing angle. Hun is often translated as the young spirit, the part that can ascend or connect to the higher realms, while Po represents the yin spirit, tied more directly to the body and material life. Most people are believed to have multiple aspects of both Hun and Po, which must stay balanced. Certain old stories discuss shell individuals missing key components, leaving them with only the Po side. They remain biologically alive and socially functional, but they lack the refined consciousness that Hun provides. Such tales are rarely spotlighted in mainstream discourse, yet they echo the idea of a partial or absent spiritual presence. In Japan, advanced Zen teachings delve into how far one can strip away the constructs of self to reach Satori. Despite the popular image of Zen emphasizing emptiness in a positive, liberating sense, older scrolls mention practitioners who observed fellow monks reciting sutras and performing tasks with no genuine interior realization, more like rogue performers. Some Zen masters refer to these monks as living ghosts, suggesting they were physically present but spiritually void. It wasn't a condemnation, rather, it highlighted the difference between outward form and genuine inner awakening. Modern Zen scholarship usually frames this as a temporary state of ignorance, but a minority of texts imply that some never break through. Paranormal investigators sometimes join forces with amateur psychologists and self-styled researchers to gather case studies. They comb through first-person accounts of uncanny behavior and catalog recurring traits. Some revolve around the idea that a real human, when pressed with intense emotion, whether grief, excitement, or anger, displays at least some spontaneous reaction. Yet these empty people allegedly follow a script, responding only with surface-level words that lack genuine emotional weight. A handful of experimenters claim to have tested friends or relatives by sharing shocking news, a death in the family, a sudden job loss, and observed that the individual offered textbook sympathy lines but failed to convey any authentic emotional resonance. One repeated sign, an odd delay before replying, as though searching for the correct social script. Mediums and energy workers add another angle. They speak of an aura or life force field that most humans exhibit. These practitioners describe scanning sessions where nearly everyone shows distinctive energy patterns, swirling colors, or vibrational frequencies. But once in a while, they claim to encounter a person whose energetic signature is either missing or disturbingly static. According to these accounts, that NPCs might be in good physical health, hold down a job, and socialize normally, yet produce none of the expected energetic fluctuations tied to thought or emotion. While mainstream science dismisses aura reading as subjective at best, it hasn't stopped alternative communities from building entire databases of these unusual cases. Some meditation teachers also report encountering individuals who simply cannot engage in deeper introspection, no matter how many hours they log on the cushion. They say most students, after sufficient practice, begin reporting subtle internal shifts, new insights, or emotional clarity. Yet there are outliers who consistently return with nothing, no sense of expanded awareness, no glimpses of altered consciousness, zero introspective progress. Seasoned instructors sometimes confess privately that they suspect these students aren't capable of genuine self-inquiry. Rather than drifting into a quiet mind state, they seem to maintain a superficial mimicry of meditative postures and breathing techniques, without ever experiencing the transformative spark that defines contemplative work. A few fringe psychiatrists have weighed in, noting that personality disorders or severe dissociation can lead to hollow effect or mechanical responses. But proponents of the soulless theory argue that the phenomenon runs deeper than any diagnostic label. They point out that many so-called NPCs function just fine in society, hold polite conversations, and pass basic empathy checks, yet something essential is absent. Researchers who track these testimonies propose that the missing piece isn't an emotional response or high IQ, but the interior observer that most people identify as of me. It's as if these individuals can talk about themselves yet have no real self to speak of. One sticking point that keeps sparking arguments in niche forums and scholarly side discussions is how the idea of NPCs or soulless peoples might affect ethical principles and social hierarchy. Critics contend that labeling anyone as lacking a soul runs the risk of creating dehumanizing attitudes. They argue that, historically, whenever a group was deemed lesser, the result tended to be discrimination or exploitation. Proponents of the NPC concept shoot back, claiming they don't endorse discrimination, but merely want to highlight an unsettling phenomenon that's been hinted at in ancient texts, alternative spiritual teachings, and modern anecdotal evidence. They see it as a puzzle worth studying rather than a tool for dividing society. Some on the more radical end of the spectrum suggest that behind closed doors, certain secret orders or elite circles have always understood the presence of these backdrop people and used them to manage social structures. They'll point to centuries-old conspiracies, from hidden councils in Renaissance Europe to rumored modern think tanks, alleging that the same blueprint carries forward an inner circle that manipulates the majority, aware that some portion of that majority is pre-programmed to follow. Historians typically write off those claims as sensational or lacking solid proof. Still, that doesn't stop a steady stream of blog posts, leaked documents, or cryptic interviews fueling speculation about advanced knowledge of a subset of individuals who never question deeper realities. Another flashpoint is where the mainstream science might eventually weigh in with formal research. Critics say the notion of soullessness or lack of consciousness is too vague to measure experimentally. They argue that real neuroscience demands quantifiable data, not intangible spiritual assumptions. Meanwhile, a small group of independent researchers tries to design tests, maybe advanced neural imaging protocols or detailed personality metrics, that could, in theory, detect an absence of subjective awareness. Thus far, no mainstream study has openly tackled the hypothesis that a percentage of the population might be operating without authentic self-awareness. The stigma attached to the idea probably doesn't help. Some individuals who believe they've encountered NPCs attempt to compile large-scale surveys, capturing subtle signs, limited emotional range, repetitive verbal patterns, absence of creative thinking, or a peculiar inability to discuss existential topics. They collect interview responses, publish them on forums, and pick apart the data looking for statistical trends. But because these investigations lack academic oversight, the results rarely pass peer review. Journalists who stumble upon these projects often dismiss them as conspiracy-laced rumors. Yet the underground movement persists, driven by personal conviction and ongoing anecdotal reports that something's missing in a chunk of humanity. Online, the debate sees daily fireworks. Some participants are everyday people who sense anomalies in their coworker, neighbor, or even a family member. Others come from a more philosophical angle, weaving the threads of ancient mysticism, computational theory, and fringe psychology into a big tapestry that points to a literal hollow segment of society. In these digital battlegrounds, skepticism meets fervor head-on. You'll find heated arguments over whether entire institutions, governments, corporations, religious bodies rely on the presence of NPCs to maintain control. You'll also encounter karma voices who are just intrigued, wanting to figure out if any real data supports these claims, or if it's all an elaborate fiction. Some watchers of this phenomenon notice parallels to the older fear of automata or robots taking human form, a timeless dread that not everyone who appears sentient truly is. People draw links to classic sci-fi, from silent mechanical men in old novels to modern android fantasies that question the essence of being human. The difference, according to NPC believers, is that what used to be fiction might actually walk among us, hidden by routine interactions that don't demand deeper introspection. All these discussions, whether they spark outrage or fascination, underscore an enduring mystery. Does everyone around us share the same rich inner life, or are some individuals only performing the role of a fully conscious human? It's the kind of question that can't be settled by a quick poll or a casual experiment. Yet it remains a gripping possibility that refuses to disappear, circulating through ancient manuscripts, mythical teachings, simulation hypotheses, philosophical debates, and countless personal encounters that raise eyebrows. Thank you so much for sticking with me until the very end of this video. Your time and attention mean a lot, and I appreciate you joining me on this deep dive into such an elusive and provocative topic. Stay curious, stay sharp, and I'll catch you in the next one. What happens when a nation demands a leader not because he is wise, but because he looks the part? When people cry out for a ruler to save them, only to realize too late that power without purpose is a curse. This is the story of King Saul, a man who had the height, the strength, and the presence of a king, yet lacked the heart to carry the weight of his throne. Israel was desperate, surrounded by enemies, fractured from within, and weary of the unseen rule of God. They wanted something tangible, something they could see, touch, and rally behind. They wanted a king, just like the nations around them, and when Saul, tall and imposing, stood before them, they believed they had found their Savior. But they had mistaken appearance for anointing, and in their impatience they would pay the price. This is not just an ancient story, it's the story of today. How often do we clamor for leaders who promise strength but deliver fear? How often do nations in their desperation elevate figures who reflect their insecurities rather than their ideals? Saul's rise and fall is a lesson that echoes through history, from ancient Israel to modern presidencies and failing governments. As we journey through the dramatic rise and tragic fall of Israel's first king, ask yourself, what happens when we choose what looks right over what is right? What is the cost of ignoring the warnings in pursuit of a ruler who tells us what we want to hear? If this video on Deep Bible Stories challenges the way you see leadership, share it with those who need to hear it. And for those who want to dive deeper, check out our ebooks, where we explore powerful biblical lessons in even greater depth. Timestamps are in the description so you can revisit key moments anytime. Now let's step back into history to a nation on the brink of transformation and a king who was everything they wanted, but not what they needed. The day Saul was crowned should have been a moment of triumph, a celebration of Israel's newfound strength, but beneath the surface, cracks had already begun to form. The people had demanded a king, and God had given them exactly what they asked for. Yet even as Saul stood before them, tall, handsome, every inch the warrior king they had envisioned, there was something unsettling about his rise. Unlike David, who would come after him, Saul did not grow into his kingship. He was handed power, not because he had earned it, but because the people insisted on it. And power given too soon is often power misused. Israel's desperation for a king was rooted in fear. The Philistines, the Ammonites, and countless other enemies loomed at their borders. The judges who once led them were fading into history. And Samuel, their last great prophet, was aging. They wanted security. They wanted a figurehead. And so, despite Samuel's warnings, they cried out, "Give us a king to lead us." 1 Samuel 8:6. Samuel's heart broke. He knew what they were asking for. They weren't just rejecting him. They were rejecting God as their ruler. But still, God allowed it. "Listen to them and give them a king," he told Samuel. 1 Samuel 8:22. It was a divine concession, not a divine endorsement. And to Saul, a young man from the tribe of Benjamin, searching for lost donkeys, unaware that his life was a Perhaps the name Shasu is still unfamiliar to you, but the story of this people is something that deserves to be widely known. Now, imagine if I told you that there was a group prior to the formation of Israel that already worshipped the Almighty God, even before Abraham. Indeed, the Shasu were an ancient and mysterious Semitic people who revered the same God who would later be recognized as the God of Israel. In this video, we will explore the mysteries surrounding this almost forgotten civilization, revelations that may transform our understanding of the origins of the worship of Yahweh. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel to follow all the details of this fascinating discovery, the mystery of the worship of Yahweh before Israel. At first, the notion of a people